Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, our Weapons Wednesday out of the way, just keep in mind, it was an M4 Sherman tank that was acquired by Fidel Castro in 1956 in pursuit of his revolutionary ambitions on the island. Now, because I lost a lot of data for you guys, I do have my notebook. We will be discussing today a little bit more freeform, all right, with you all. So if anybody has supplementary info about these topics that they happen to know that they want to share with the chat, feel free to share links. Otherwise, we're just kind of going to be talking today, and then I'm going to pop in. I have 3 videos to show you today for everything else. This is our holographic dragon notebook. It's very cute. I got it at the Miami airport. It is this dragon is a gusano, actually. This is a gusano dragon. He's snarling at Cuban socialism because he hates it so much because he's from Miami. He's like, no, I need a sugar plantation there. That's what he's saying, right? So, you know, he's a part of the delicate fabric of our Cuba experiences. You know, bad dragon, wouldn't pet, but that's okay. You know, you're in Miami. When in Miami, what are you gonna do? It's like when in Rome. You got to do it. So let's get into the details. So I'm just going to show you guys my Twitch plan because it is a little outline and I do think it's useful. This is it. I don't know if you guys can see it. If I need to zoom in, maybe. Can I like view it? Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Oh yeah, that's this one. So you guys can see it bigger. This here is really what we're looking at for today. This is the timeline of events. I'll zoom in even more. Why not? We can make this thing fucking huge. We can make it so big Robert could read it on his phone. This is what our timeline of events is for you to really understand Cuba. Now, the thing about Cuba is that Cuba was first hit by Columbus in 1492. Like, when that guy was sailing the ocean blue with his fuck-ass colonization tour, he landed in Cuba. So he was in Cuba pretty early, and his dumbass thought it was Asia because he's fucking stupid, right? Dumbest man ever. And that's the thing that I think is the most insulting about colonization. It's always the dumbest motherfuckers everywhere. Like, I will never forget people in India being like, we're being taken over by the British, the people who don't even know how to clean their asses. And I was like, damn, the indignity of that. The fucking indignity of that. Right? So, pretty brutal. So Columbus lands on Cuba and he thinks it's Asia because he's fucking stupid. And this launches a long period of the colonization of Cuba. So in 1508, Cuba had been fully mapped out by Europeans who came there. And pretty soon after that, from 1514 to 1519, started the process of founding the city we now know of as Havana. There were a lot of indigenous people on Cuba. And a particularly sad story about colonization that happened is that at 1,300 native villagers brought food to the Europeans to welcome them to the island in like a show of like kindness. And they were just slaughtered for absolutely no reason by the European colonizers. And I included this story because I really want you to keep this framework in mind when talking about Cuba now. There are still indigenous Cubans, obviously. There were also people who descended from African slaves in Cuba also. There are also still people who descended from Europeans in Cuba. And Cuba has a different relationship with race than the United States does, certainly, because they are Marxist. They do have a working class approach first. They have solidarity with each other. And they interpret and deal with race very differently. And some people who'd been to Cuba a lot had said that in previous convoys they had actually gone on, there had been white liberals who came to Cuba with them who had wanted to basically apply a United States framework of race relations to Cuba. And applying that framework was very disrespectful to the Cuban people there and did not work and made everybody very uncomfortable. So it is important to note that even though they had slavery the way much of the Americas did, the way race developed there, especially after the revolution, gives them a different understanding and relationship with race today. So when we, for example, saw Victor Drake speaking, who's a legendary Cuban revolutionary, who's a very dark black skinned man, right? Somebody was like, you know, you've done so much for black revolutionaries around the world. And he was like, we don't think of it like that. I haven't done so much for black revolutionaries. You know, hopefully I've done a lot for revolutionaries. Any skin color, though, of everybody. Like, we are all in this together. And I want to say that doesn't mean, obviously, that prejudice doesn't exist in the island. But as black Marxists were explaining this, they're like, yeah, but like racism is so systemic and structural, and they don't have those systems of systematized racism in place there. So it's different. So I think that's just good. If you come from the United States, it can be very, very difficult to remember that even other places that experienced colonization and brought slaves there are going to have different relationships with a race that developed as a result of their unique history. So Cuba's is a little bit different. And that's something we all learn when we're there and we talk to people on the island. Are we saying Cubans don't see color? There was actually a joke where I said that at some point. I made the same joke. But, you know, it's not true. They do. They understand people's unique upbringings, and they talk about the racism that existed before the revolution, certainly, and prejudice can still exist, but they don't have the race is not weaponized by our ruling class there to further divide the people amongst each other like it is here, right? So here in the United States, for example, they tell you vote for Kamala Harris, a black woman, to uphold white supremacy and continue ethnic cleansing in Palestine. That's not the kind of shit you're going to experience there. They're not going to weaponize it in that way as a wedge to divide the working class from each other. So that's important to note. So, but the reason why I want to tell a story about the indigenous people, the native people bringing food to welcome the colonizers and them just being slaughtered mercilessly for no reason is that this is like a microcosm. It's like an allegory or metaphor or whatever for the entire relationship the Western world has with Cuba today. The Cuban people are very international in their disposition. Their ethics, their morality is very international. They care very much about other people. You will never hear the word love as much in your life as you will in Cuba. Everything, they're like, we love you, we love people, we love everyone. We want to show love as a verb to people. And that includes things like teaching them how to read. That includes giving them healthcare when they need it. They're a very loving, giving people, and it's part of their core ideology, and it comes from them being socialist. It comes from them being Marxist-Leninist, and I think that's important as well. And the Western world just wants to wipe these people off the fucking face of the earth. So I included that there because it is still to this day what we see happening with Cuba. The people of Cuba are trying to bring us food, and we're trying to slaughter them. That's a metaphor and an allegory for everything happening if you were a Western person. Comradely love. Yes, exactly. And it comes down to touch even. When you see videos of people in Cuba, you'll see them touching each other a lot more than we think is comfortable in the West. They greet each other with kisses, even if they're strangers, right? And that also comes along with it. And I was thinking about that, how under capitalism, things can feel very personal. You're like, I'm in here, my body, my safety, my place. But under communism and socialism, things are just so much more collective. Your brain instinctively is thinking more communally, and how that might affect your relationship with personal space, right? With your body, with not wanting to be touched by other people, you know. And I say that as a person who, you know, other people in my life have been like, you're not really a hugger. Like, you don't really, you know, which isn't true. I can perform normal human functions of intimacy, but you know, it is something for me to think about personally, and that was something we noticed while on the island. So very, very interesting. Quabaj says older Albanian men would kiss each other on both cheeks while greeting and wouldn't stop kissing until the greeting had completed. Young Albanians raised under capitalism don't do this, but older Albanians did this during communism. Fraternal kiss was universal. Yes, they do the same thing. It's very, very interesting. I feel like there's probably some great opportunity to write a thesis about this somewhere for somebody who does behavioral analysis of some kind or something, or anthropology. It is very fascinating to me. And there also have been studies that physical distance between people actually creates political distance and a we they mentality. And I've seen studies about this specifically with public transportation and how the isolation of being in a car by yourself every day psychologically distances you from the rest of your community and makes you think politically more in terms of me than we, versus people who take public transportation tend to think more communally and collectively. And anthropologists in behavioral analysis have thought that this has to do literally with your physical proximity to other people. So all interesting things to consider in terms of this history, right? So, yes. All right. Indigenous Cubans still exist in Cuba to this day, but they're mostly in the eastern part of Cuba. So from the 1600s to the 1700s, slavery came to Cuba, and they mostly had sugar and tobacco plantations. That was most of the industry there. So they imported enslaved people from Africa. They brought them to Cuba to work against their will. And, you know, this was all under Spain. There was a period of time in there where Britain conquered Cuba, and then Spain reconquered it. But really, Cuba was viewed as a territorial acquisition of Western colonial powers, European colonial powers, because of its potential to produce especially sugar, but also tobacco as well. Now, the late 1800s, slavery was abolished in Cuba, but exploitative plantation labor still existed there. And that's why when you hear people talk about how Castro took away people's sugar plantations and their slaves, technically slavery was outlawed, but in the same way, the United States, technically slavery was outlawed, but then it became illegal to just be a black person existing without a job. And then once you were arrested, you were sent to prison. All of a sudden, your prison was leasing you back out to the same plantation you used to work on, and now you were basically enslaved again. There was a lot of stuff like that going on in Cuba as well. Also, throughout the 1800s, their main trade did evolve to be mainly sugar. They did move away from tobacco, which is important to note as well. So from 1868 to 1878, Cuba had an independence struggle to try to break free of European colonization in general. And pretty shortly after this, 1898 to 1902, the United States occupied Cuba. So as you know, whenever a group of people who have experienced enslavement, enslaved African people being brought there, they have been under colonial control. Whenever they start to fight for their independence, the colonial powers get really, really freaked out, right? They're like, no, not on my watch. So this happened there as well. And Haiti's obviously the biggest example of this. I think we all see that in Haiti. My screen share, sorry, it's just this. I'm just talking to you. Unfortunately, there's nothing really to go off of from here. I have my notes. I think that's kind of it. We don't have as much content today. Fork! What are you mad at? Fork! It's probably just a squirrel, right? I bet it's just a squirrel. I bet it's nothing. Should I go check? I'm gonna go check her. We'll see. She wanted to go in the big bed. She was barking at me to bring her to the big bed. Also, worth noting, Fork lost her voice too. When I came home, Fork lost her voice from being so upset I was gone. I was like, why does she sound different? And Bobby was like, and she lost her voice. She is a diva. She's a little diva. Okay, so the United States shows up in Cuba and they're like, we're going to occupy you temporarily. But this process, by 1902, American companies owned 80% of Cuba's ore exports, most cigarette factories, and 40 some odd % of sugar production on the island. Bobby, such a southern name. First stream, yay, left a sub. Thank you. Thanks for being here. We're talking about Cuba. This is day 2. We're just giving a historical overview, and we're going to watch 3 videos today. It's kind of a chill day. You missed us learning about a tank, the M4 Sherman tank, which is instrumental in the Cuban Revolution. Yeah, so, okay. The United States gets involved, and we start really taking over industry in Cuba. By 1915, 10% of all land in Cuba was owned by Americans, and we're going to see that this only gets more intense. In 1901, the Platt Amendment was formalized, and this really, I'm going to pull up some info about the Platt Amendment so you guys can see it. This was really what solidified the United States scope of control over Cuba. So we're going to pull this up. This is from archives.gov. We're just going to go over the Platt Amendment really fast. So approved on May 22nd, 1903, the Platt Amendment was a treaty between the United States and Cuba that attempted to protect Cuba's independence from foreign intervention. It permitted extensive U.S. involvement in Cuba international and domestic affairs for the enforcement of Cuban independence. What year did I say? I said 1901. That's when they started working on this, I guess. So 1903 is when it was ratified. U.S. victory in the Spanish-American War of 1898 produced a peace treaty that compelled Spain to relinquish control of several overseas territories, including Cuba. In April of 1898, Senator Henry M. Teller of Colorado proposed an amendment to the U.S. declaration of war against Spain, which stated that the United States would not establish permanent control over Cuba. The Teller Amendment asserted that the United States hereby disclaims any disposition of intention to exercise sovereignty, jurisdiction, or control over said island except for pacification thereof, and asserts its determination, when that is accomplished, to leave the government and control of the island to its people. So the Senate adopted the amendment on April 19th. Nonetheless, and remember this was 1898, this is the start of that kind of occupation territory period up to 1902. Nevertheless, U.S. troops occupied Cuba for several years after the war ended. Under General Leonard Wood, the military government organized a school system, ordered the finances, and made significant progress, I guess, in eliminating yellow fever. Yeah, they also did a lot of fucked up things to Cuba, though. They took control of the land. They took control of business. They took control of, anything that might generate money and profit. Yeah, I'll send this link. Hold on. This is from archives.gov. I'll make you guys a tiny URL for it. Boop, boop. There it is. So, when the Constitutional Convention of Cuba started its deliberations in July of 1900, it received notification that U.S. Congress intended to attach an amendment to the Cuban Constitution. The following year, Secretary of War, they brought back war. We used to have a Secretary of War, now we got the Department of War again. It's all war all the time. Elihu Root. This is one of those old-ass 1800s white guy names. This is, like, not a name you see. This is, like, how is this a name kind of energy. Like, Elihu Root? Warmaxing drafted a set of articles as guidelines for future U.S.-Cuba relations. This set of articles became known as the Platt Amendment, after Senator Orville Platt of Connecticut, who presented it. Platt was a U.S. Senator from 1879 to 1905 and influenced the decision to annex Hawaii and occupy the Philippines. So, this guy loved territorial expansion, he loved colonization, he loved imperialism. As chair of the Senate Committee of Relationships on Cuba, he sponsored the amendment as a rider attached to the Army Appropriations Bill of 1901. So this is when we first saw it. When I said 1901, this thing came about. It got finalized in 1903, though. Cubans reluctantly included the amendment, which virtually made Cuba a U.S. protectorate in their constitution. The Platt Amendment was also incorporated in a permanent treaty between the United States and Cuba. The Platt Amendment stipulated the conditions for U.S. intervention in Cuban affairs and permitted the United States to lease or buy lands for the purpose of establishing naval bases. The main one was where? Guantanamo Bay. And a lot of Americans don't seem to remember Guantanamo Bay is in Cuba. The place where we torture political prisoners is in Cuba. So Americans want to get on the internet and tell you Cuba tortures political prisoners. We torture political prisoners in Cuba, right? There's no evidence that they're torturing political prisoners. There is plenty of evidence that we are torturing political prisoners in Cuba. Like, and just because I feel like the reference is important to have, right? I'm pulling this up for us. We got this little website here. Freedom from Torture in Guantanamo Bay Prison. For more than 2 decades, Guantanamo Bay Prison has stood as one of the world's most infamous detention camps. Today it has become a global symbol of torture, injustice, and cruelty, embodying the severe human rights violations perpetrated in the name of the so-called War on Terror. So remember, every accusation is a confession. Whenever the United States is like, they're torturing people, they have torture camps, it's because we have torture camps, right? It's because we have torture. Okay, I must stretch and hydrate. Okay, I'm gonna do it. Oh, actually, that felt good. Oh, did you guys hear that? Could you hear my back crack? That was crazy. Bye, Hamon Pizza. No, this is good. This is helping me. I kind of feel like the milk in my coffee is helping my throat too. It doesn't feel so bad. Yeah. So, okay. Just really to hammer this home, this is in Cuba. This is the United States torturing people on Cuban soil. It's a detention center established in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks on the United States. Also worth noting, Barack Obama campaigned on closing Guantanamo Bay. He did not close Guantanamo Bay, right? The opened the U.S. opened the offshore detention facility in an attempt to evade the rule of law. In the name of the U.S.'s war on terror, people deemed by the U.S. to be enemy combatants were detained at the facility. Many were tortured and denied basic human rights. Some of these were literally just people with Middle Eastern sounding names. I want you guys to really understand. If you weren't alive in the aftermath of 9/11, there was a psychotic, racist fervor against anybody who might be considered Middle Eastern. People were murdered on the streets just for how they looked. Sikh men were attacked for wearing turbans because idiot Americans didn't understand what it meant to be Muslim. Muslim people, though, were also aggressively targeted and slaughtered. I mean, people were locked up, people were detained, and a lot of people ended up here for no reason other than that they were Middle Eastern. That's it. And yes, as Chris is saying, immediate post 9/11 was insane. There were like roving gangs of white Americans on the streets looking for Middle Eastern people to kill, like to avenge us for 9/11. It was very, very, very fucked. It was very, very deranged. So this was in the aftermath of that. This was all part of that. They were denied the right to a trial. These weren't people who'd been convicted of anything. They were just random people snatched up off the street. And many of the first detainees, right, they arrived in 2002. Since then, Guantanamo Bay has imprisoned 780 men and boys, children, from 48 countries, and many have been tortured. 9 have died in custody at least. Those are the ones we know about. And only 16 detainees were ever actually convicted of a crime, just 2%. 98% of the people who are being held and tortured in Guantanamo Bay by the United States government have never been convicted of crime. It's really, really wild. So, after 24 years of injustice, this was from 2025 last year, 15 men are still being held without a charge in Guantanamo Bay. Among them are 3 men approved for release, including one who's been waiting now for 15 years. He's been in prison for 15 years, never charged with any crime, being tortured at Guantanamo Bay by the U.S. government. Another 3 are now considered forever prisoners, to be held indefinitely without ever being charged for any crime. No hope of trial. This is what the United States does. Think about all the shit we say other countries do. Think about all of the justification used for us to go to war with Iran, to hate Cuba, to hate Venezuela, to kidnap the president of Venezuela. All the bad shit we say happens to people in North Korea. That's because this is what we do. This is what we do. Forever prisoners who've never been convicted of a crime. Right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly, Virgo. Untried forever prisoners, but the DPRK is bad. Sure. Okay. Yeah, we don't really know. Guantanamo Bay is very secretive about what's going on there. In 2025, Guantanamo's legacy of torture, suffering, and dehumanization lives on as a place where horrific human rights violations were carried out. Until it is closed once and for all, its existence can be viewed as an offering of a symbolic green light for torture worldwide. So here's a little timeline we're going to go over. 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, President Bush launched the war on terror and invaded Afghanistan. This is when I was first radicalized. The U.S. began to build an offshore detention facility in Cuba to house captured men suspected of terrorism. But because the prison is not on U.S. soil, the Bush administration claimed detainees had no rights or recourse to the U.S. justice system. In 2002, the first detainees captured in Afghanistan arrived at Guantanamo Bay. These are just random guys that we captured in Afghanistan and we trafficked to Guantanamo Bay for torture. Images of kneeling hooded men in orange jumpsuits in mesh cages sparked outrage on a global scale. The U.S. employs the term unlawful enemy combatants to describe detainees as part of an effort to legitimize their denial of rights. At the end of the year, U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld approved a range of enhanced interrogation techniques, a term used to justify and deny acts of torture. Now, I want you guys to know, first of all, Donald Rumsfeld is the same guy who's responsible for that famous satellite image of the DPRK, right? This is from Donald Rumsfeld giving a presentation. I'm going to show you guys this. So really you understand the political climate we're talking about. This is where this image came from. This is obviously, as Susie Kim describes, a man-made composite satellite map. These down here are fishing boats. And because they've overemphasized the light scale going on in South Korea, it's made it look like fishing boats are somehow island cities in order to kind of downplay what's going on up here. Also worth noting, satellite images, come from satellites that are rotating at different points in the Earth. Yes, they intentionally underexpose the light coming from the DPRK and overexpose the light coming from the south. And that's why these fishing boats look like they're islands, because they overexpose the light coming from the south. So this is Donald Rumsfeld who did this. So this is the guy. Same guy who approved enhanced interrogation techniques. Now, this term was also major when this happened. Everyone was like, what the fuck is an enhanced interrogation technique? Do you mean torture? Do you mean torture? And this is where actual conversations about waterboarding and stuff started to happen. And he did mean torture. So by 2003, 680 detainees were imprisoned in Guantanamo. In 2004, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision that challenged the U.S.'s detention policies at Guantanamo by ruling its detainees had the right legally to challenge their own imprisonment. Now, Barack Obama became president in 2009. He campaigned on this. He immediately ordered the closure of Guantanamo, but it didn't happen. And then he just kind of was like, oh, okay. He didn't really fight for it. And everyone was like, girl, what the fuck? This is crazy. Many detainees were released and transferred, and the population did go down. But he was just like, couldn't do it. What are you going to do? That's it. Now, keep in mind, this man had a supermajority when he was first elected. He could have theoretically pushed through anything that the Democrats claim they want to do, right? He could have pushed through healthcare. He could have pushed through codifying Roe v. Wade. He could have pushed through closing Guantanamo Bay. He did not. And then he waited, and then he was like, oh no, the Republicans said I couldn't. All right, so I just really want to put that out there. This is like the year I graduated college, all right? And I voted for Obama in one term because Peace and Freedom Party ran Roseanne Barr for president, and I was like, I'm not fucking doing that. That was the 1 year Peace and Freedom Party cooped the fuck out. And I was like, nope. I feel like it was either this era or 2012 that I voted for him, and I was just like, oh God, never again. Never. This is fucking disgusting, right? Roseanne Barr. She's this deranged celebrity who for a while was telling everybody she was a communist. So Peace and Freedom Party, which is our electoral party for socialist, an umbrella socialist or electoral party out here in California, ran her. But I was like, this lady's insane. Like, absolutely not. And then a few months after that, she was like, never mind, I'm a MAGA Trump Republican. Haha. So I'm like, weirdo. Yeah, she used to interview Parenti stuff. She did, for a while, she was like, I am a communist. And then, but I was like, I think she's just a celebrity trying to be a contrarian. And that is what happened. Yeah. Wild. So one of these Obama years, I voted for him, and I was just like, I fucking hate myself. Yeah. All right. So in 2013, so also I just want to say this, the way they word this, he becomes president and immediately orders the closure of Guantanamo, but his plan is black. Yeah, that's misleading. That's kind of a little misleading. This seems like a Democratic Party pilled kind of website, the way they worded that, because I remember this and it didn't go down quite like that. So at least 100 men in Guantanamo began a hunger strike in protest of the conditions, and they end up getting force-fed. The UN gets involved. They're like, this is a violation of the Convention Against Torture. If the UN's mad at it, it's real bad, because the UN, they're all fucked up and bad and evil too. When we talk about Korea, actually, there's a book I recommend a lot, The Hidden History of the Korean War, about propaganda. The reason I recommend that book is because they talk a lot about the UN's involvement in Korea. There's also, the UN has done some very, very shady, unsavory things in Haiti. They're up to bad shit all over the place. So if the UN is like, hey, this is a little extreme even for us, that's how you know it's bad, right? That's how you know it's bad. So President Trump then signs a legal order to keep Guantanamo open in 2018 during his first administration, reversing the policy of the Obama administration. Not really. Guantanamo was still open under Obama. And in 2021, Biden takes office and he's like, I'm going to close the prison, which now has 39 detainees we know of, but then he doesn't. The Democrats are always like, I'm going to do it, I swear. And they magically never do. Big fucking surprise, right? Like everything. In the last days of the Biden administration, 11 detainees were moved from Guantanamo Bay to Oman, leaving just 15 people detained that we know about. And then in 2025, Trump brought Guantanamo to the headlines by suggesting that immigrants should be classified as enemy combatants and housed in Guantanamo, and signed an executive order to expand its Migrants Operations Center. This is all in Cuba. This is what the United States thinks of Cuba. So really have that in your head. And this all goes back to the Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment from 1901 to 1903, when this thing was getting put into things. The Platt Amendment is what made that possible. It stipulated that the United States could lease or buy lands for the purpose of establishing naval bases, the main one at Guantanamo Bay. And it is technically, yes, a naval base. Okay? Now, it barred Cuba from going to debt, making a treaty that would give another nation power over its affairs, or stopping the United States from imposing a sanitation program on the island. Specifically, Article 3 required that the government of Cuba consent to the right of the United States to intervene in Cuban affairs for, quote, the preservation of Cuban independence, the maintenance of a government adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty, and for discharging the obligations with respect to Cuba imposed by the Treaty of Paris on the United States, which is now assumed to be undertaken by the government of Cuba. So this is really the amendment that the U.S. passed, right? That was like, look, Cuba, you're independent. Kinda. We can just do shit there if we want, though. So remember that. And that is really the nature of the relationship the United States had over Cuba and still continues to try to have to this day. All right, so 1902. This guy named Palma takes office in Cuba. He's like now the leader of Cuba, and Cuba basically becomes a tourist resort. This is also the same year Guantanamo Bay was leased to Cuba. So what the United States really tried to do with Cuba is use it for sugar plantations, yes, but additionally to turn it into like Las Vegas, but on an island. And this was really our goal. If you imagine what we did to Hawaii, what we're trying to do to Puerto Rico, we wanted basically an opportunity to make money off of tourism in Cuba. So when you see people going online critiquing like, oh my God, these leftists from the United States stayed in 5-star hotels in Cuba. Girl, that's because today the United States government controls what hotels Americans are allowed to stay at. You're only allowed to stay at privately owned businesses because of the blockade the United States has against Cuba. That's the United States rules. Only 20% of all business on the island is privately owned. And the businesses that the United States government will allow you to stay in are these tourist style, often Western backed places, because the United States wants to expand Western tourism on the island under our leadership. That's why we want to take Cuba. We've always wanted to take Cuba for these two purposes. And what we're going to see is that later, the United States Mafia gets super involved in this as well. And we basically run Cuba like an offshore den of corruption for, Americans to go do sexual tourism, traffic drugs, do gambling, do all sorts of things that are not beneficial for the Cuban people. Like our bread and circuses for the American masses, we wanted Cuba to be the circus. You know what I mean? Literal tourist trap hell, yeah. So that's what's going on there. So in 1906, the United States occupied Cuba again. Palma resigned, and the U.S. governor, Charles Magoon, I think is his name. I have to check this. My handwriting was so bad. Took control for 3 years. So let's take a look. Cuba, U.S. I'm going to get his name right. Governor Charles Magoon. Is this really Charles Magoon? Yes, his name is Charles Magoon. My handwriting did not steer me wrong. This guy, Charles Magoon, ended up kind of just being in control of Cuba. Really, really, really fucking weird. Here we go. C.E. Magoon dies. Once ruled Cuba. $1 a week. I don't want to subscribe to that. Fine. I'll do it so we can... Oh, I'll do archive.ph actually. Let's see if that works. The problem is that Times might be too smart. New York Times might be too smart for us for that, but let's try it. Let's see if it works. Waiting. Let's see if it works. I don't think it's gonna work. I don't think this is gonna work for us. Okay, I'll pay the fucking $4. Whatever. For you. For you, chat. It's your $4. It's your little subbies. Pay the $4 for us to do this. For us to read the New York Times in shame. This horrible, horrible. But I will say I really love the Times Machine, unfortunately, because it gives you insight to how the mainstream media was reporting on things back in the day. They'll show you like literal scans of their newspapers from like back in the day. And even if you're like, oh, this is some New York Times propaganda bullshit, it's interesting to see how they were reporting this shit. You know what I mean? Back in the day. So I do think it's fascinating. And like, look, they literally have scans of all their newspapers here. So I'm like, okay, you can at least get a sense of what the public at the time was seeing, which I think is interesting. Is there? Okay, well, I spent $4. You know, it's fine. So Charles E. Magoo of Lincoln, Nebraska, former governor of the Panama Canal Zone and minister to Panama and provisional governor of Cuba from October 12, 1906 to January 28, 1909, died on January 15th, 1920. This is when this news article is from. From Lawyer to Dictator was the title of an article that appeared a few years ago about Charles E. Magoon. The caption was in a broad sense of a true one, for the course of his life did carry him from a law office in Lincoln to the position of chief executive of the Cuban people, and the occupancy of the chair in the Havana Palace once used by Captain General Weyler. So, again, every accusation is a confession. They're telling you Fidel Castro is a dictator. They're telling you Raul Castro is a dictator. They're telling you Diaz-Canel today is a dictator. But no, the United States was running dictators over Cuba in the past. Very, very interesting. He was born on a Minnesota farm in 1861, but he got most of his education in Nebraska, working his way through the University of Nebraska and gaining admittance to the bar there in 1892. His private practice was steadily mounting when he gained his first public recognition by his work as judge advocate of the State National Guard. The result was a summons to Washington to serve in the law office of the Bureau of Insular Affairs in the War Department. There, in a comparatively short time, he became an authority on colonial law and made a deep impression upon Elihu Root. Remember this guy? Yeah, he's back. The Secretary of State pronounced Mr. Magoon's legal opinions among the most valuable contributions ever made to the American jurisprudence, and ordered them to be published in book form. Under the title, The Law of Civil Government Under Military Occupation, the work ran through 3 editions and is still an authority. Voice is getting scratchy. I'm not a chanter. I can only do the megaphone, I think, from now on. During the brief existence of the first Panama Commission... Oh, hydrate. Thank you. If you have Amazon Prime, you can subscribe to me for free, and I get money. Yeah, this man is such an incredible colonist. We have to make a book for it. Yeah, exactly. So... He ends up being the governor of the Canal Zone, May 25th, 1905 in Panama. His governorship, revolutionary mutterings were hushed under him. The country was heavily policed. He was like a dictator, yeah, everywhere that he led. His government was whatever. They said he brought the island back to a state of pacificity, right? They also say he maintained the goodwill of the inhabitants. I find that hard to believe. So he was like a colonial overlord kind of guy, right? So that's the guy who's in charge. So we put a dictator in there. We put Charles Magoon, a guy from Nebraska, in charge of Cuba. We had a dictator there. So from 1908 to 1912, Jose Miguel Gomez ends up being in control of Cuba, and he ends up suppressing Afro-Cubans quite a bit. And so these conditions that come about are going to be the pretext for a lot of the precursor, that's a better word, for a lot of the people becoming very, very upset and leading them to want to participate in revolutionary activity in the upcoming years. So again, when we say Cubans today, don't have the same relationship with race that we do, that doesn't mean they didn't used to, right? That means that they had their revolution, their new revolutionary socialist government, they feel differently about it, they interpret it differently, but they still dealt with this kind of suppression. The Afro-Cubans, did experience a lot of repression and suppression. From 1913 to 1920, um, a new person gets in charge, and he ends up like just cooking the sugar prices. The sugar prices go through the roof. So remember, we have the tourism area, and then we have the sugar plantations. So Havana's the tourism area, and then the outskirts are all sugar plantations. And this island is just generating money for the United States, basically, for United States businesses. We are super involved in what's going on there. We're leasing land from them, really, without their consent. That's what's going on. 1920 to 1925, Alfredo Zayas comes in, but sugar prices plummet under him. So Zayas goes to the United States and takes a loan out for Cuba. So now this financially ties Cuba to the United States even harder. And people around this time are like, look, the thing about Cuba is that it's a colony in everything but name. Like, it is a colony of the United States. And they really start to talk about this. And I'm going to see if I can find some documentation from this, from this era for us to supplement this. I found a paper. I found a dissertation, 368-page dissertation. I'm going to try to find something a little easier to read. Oh, Smithsonian published an article called "The Man Who Saved Havana." Shut up. Ew. Oh, okay. I don't know what we have that going on. Smithsonian. I bet it's going to be weird. Oh, no. It's actually pretty good. Eusebio Leal is the official historian of the city of Havana. Okay, maybe that's not so bad. That's not so bad. Okay, let's see if they have anything about this Alfredo Zayas guy in here. Yes. Okay. So they say he was basically talking about education in Latin America and Cuba. And it is true that some people did experience like high levels of education and things like this. Lord Oxium, also worth noting, sugar was made into molasses, which was a prime ingredient for bombs and explosives. It wasn't just made and sold because it's sweet. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. So Cuba at this time, yeah, like we're talking about, a colony in all but name. And we do talk about how they were like prospering and there was money, blah, blah, blah. But you have to remember for who. If Cuba's a colony in all but name, there's a lot of basically Americans that are there, right? A lot of Europeans that are there. This is not stuff that the entire island enjoyed. And it really is important. So remember, we've had this history where the Afro-Cubans have been suppressed. There's a history of slavery. Americans are owning and operating colonies and resorts on the island. Not just Americans, white people of European descent. And they're like, we have prosperity. And we have guys from Nebraska running dictatorships there where everybody's like, oh my God, we're marveling at how passive the people are there now. And then we're like, oh, and like, look, they open schools and stuff. You just have to remember for who. And for who is going to be really, really important by the time we get to Fidel Castro. Because Castro identified there basically being the Castro government 5 problems that needed to be solved from the pre-revolutionary issues. Some means less than 10% of the population by any means necessary. Less than half of the Cuban population was literate when the revolution happened. Exactly. Now, from 1933 to 1934, rebellion starts to happen in Cuba. And radicals, activists, and workers, people from all walks of life come together and they form a provisional revolutionary government. They're like, this has to end. We're a colony of the United States. Some people are prospering. The rest, most of us aren't. You know, there's massive structural racism happening on the island. We are just this labor class getting exploited by rich plantation owners and rich capitalists who are working in the tourism industry. And this was led by this guy named Dr. Ramon Grau. So let me see if I can find a picture of this guy for you guys at least. He was a physician and he was a professor. And this was him. So we've got some pictures of Ramon Grau. And it was a popular movement. This was a working class movement of people, right? Under this from 1933 that happened. And he wanted to abolish the Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment is what is making us a neo-colony of the United States, and we have to get rid of it. So this was his main goal. Let's see if we can find anything else about him that might be interesting. We got a lot of, we got the New York Times again. It's paying for itself, guys. It's paying for itself. Uh, So this article comes out in 1933. This is when the revolution happens. President of Cuba, a medical teacher. Grau San Martin, a bachelor nearly 49, was dean of Havana University School. All right. Cuba's new president, this is who they're talking about here, a determined opportunist. He was arrested several times and finally left Cuba for the United States early in 1982. When is this article from? 1933. This has to be 1932. I think they used picture to text, and it was 1932 here. So I think that's a translation error here. A digital translation error. When the revolutionary junta was formed at Miami last March, Dr. Grau San Martin was a member representing the university group in the deliberations held both at Miami and New York. He was one of the most prominent members of the Commission of Five that set up a governmental junta, and it was he who informed President de Ceperes that he had been replaced. On the Commission of Five, Dr. Grau San Martin was placed in charge of the Department of Public Instruction and Public Health. Dr. Grau had been president of the Hispanic American Society and had represented Cuba's medical fraternity at many international conferences. There was also Eduardo J. Chibas, who was a mining engineer, civil engineer, who was Secretary of Public Works. He received an offer of the same post under the new cabinet. He's 64 years old. He's a graduate of the class of 89 at the School of Engineering in Troy, New York, and he has an extensive engineering and business experience in Cuba, other Latin American countries, and in the United States. So we still have some American influence here, right, which is interesting. He also was in the U.S. Fifth Army Corps as an engineer. There's also Dr. Carlos E. Finley, who took over the portfolio of public health, and he was the son of a famous discoverer of the transmission of yellow fever by this mosquito. He was born in Havana. He was educated at Bellin College. He went to the United States. So, there's still this relationship going on, etc. But this movement is a worker movement. It's a popular working class movement. And yeah, the guy wants to abolish the Platt Amendment. All right. From here, where does this go? Well, the provisional government of the Grau movement did a lot for the people of Cuba. First of all, they gave Havana University autonomy. They gave women the right to vote. They gave an 8-hour workday. Again, this is in 1933, so they're doing pretty well. They created a minimum wage. They created a Ministry of Labor, and they did agrarian reform, which gave some land to peasants. So as you can imagine, this was really upsetting to the Americans, right? Even though there was still some American influence and they were trying to play nice, the Americans were losing their control over Cuba, which had been obviously very profitable for them. So from 1934 to 1952, the main figure that we're going to talk about a lot coming up to this, Batista, comes into play. We learned about tanks. We did. Yeah, you missed the tank thing. If you're coming in late, you got to go back and watch the VOD or the YouTube export of the video. So Batista had been basically a military guy. He was in the military for years. And in 1952, he staged a right-wing coup backed by the United States government. He was like, we got to get control over the government. What's going on here? Things are going too left-wing of a direction. The United States wanted more of a firm hand on what was happening in Cuba. So he stages a revolution in 1952 and overthrows the Grau government. From 1940 to 1952, there had been various different leaders happening in Cuba, but it was still under this more left-wing government that was serving more the interests of the people there. And I think by more, it's best to think like Allende. These weren't explicit Marxist-Leninists, right? But they were doing land reform. They were doing things to try to help people. They wanted to make Cuba not a neo-colony of the USA. And that is still enough to upset people. When we talk about like third wayism, we talk a lot about people from third world countries, right, who don't want to go fully communist because they don't want to invoke the ire of the US government and Western imperial powers. But we see their fate ends up the same nonetheless. It doesn't matter if you fully commit or not. If you are doing anything that threatens Western capital, Western money, we know the United States government's not going to let you last. And that's exactly what happened. This wasn't full on communism, but they were doing way too much shit that helped their people and hurt US business interests. So they got the same treatment. Now, in 1952, the coup that happened is considered relatively bloodless. And I want to talk about what was going on basically under Batista. But first, I want to show you a video from Victor Drake. So when we were in Cuba, we got to meet with 3 revolutionaries from the Cuban Revolutionary period. And one was Victor Drake. And this is back in the Batista days, and Victor's story starts with him being 15 years old and the day Batista came to power in 1952 and staged the coup. Let's take a look at this. 1 second, I'm going to find it. All right.
I will be brief on that.
Ciertamente ese día, 10 de marzo,
That day, March the 10th,
me celebraron los 15 que se celebra en
they,
todo el país.
we had my quinceañero birthday party, as we do in every country.
Los 15 míos me los celebraron preso.
But my 15th birthday party was celebrated when I was in jail.
Después me entendió que fue el día del golpe de Estado de Batista.
It was the day of Batista's coup,
Y que un grupo de jóvenes,
and a group of young people,
estudiantes,
students,
nos lanzamos a la calle, como decimos.
we went out on the streets demonstrating against that Batista says in
Pidiendo
power
abajo
action.
Batista.
We were shouting down with Batista.
En mi caso personal, yo no conocía mucho a Batista.
In my personal case, I didn't know much about
De
Batista.
Batista me habían hablado mis padres,
My-
mis hermanos mayores.
My parents told me about Batista, my older brother,
De los asesinatos que había cometido.
all the
en la
killings
etapa,
he had been committing in the previous stage, Batista.
Pero no lo conocía prácticamente.
But practically, I didn't know.
So when he talked about all the killings he'd been committing in the previous stage, this is when Batista had a military position but had not yet staged the coup. So Batista had been in the military basically from 1934 up to 1952, but he was notorious for being a particularly harsh guy in the military. So what Victor's talking about here is like, hey, he was notorious for killing a bunch of people when he was in his military role, so him taking over as dictator is going to be bad for us. That's really what he's referencing.
About Batista.
Esto me hizo salir para la calle ese día.
But that, what he did, made me go out on the streets.
Pero yo para completar lo más digo que yo me uní a la revolución
But to be more concrete, I could say that I got to unite the revolution
por ser joven,
because I was a young person,
por ser negro
because I was a black person,
y por ser pobre.
and because I was a poor person.
Estos tres factores
Those
And remember, at the time, Afro-Cubans were being heavily oppressed by this government. So when he says as a black person, he's talking about that oppression. Now, this is the same man who in a different video, which I'll probably show at a different time, said, now, we don't really, I didn't do things for black people necessarily. I did them for all people. But at the time, the oppression he was experiencing was definitely because he was black. And this oppression of Afro-Cubans was very, very prominent on the island.
three factors,
indivisibles
you cannot separate them,
me unió a la revolución
were the one put me together with the
desde el
revolution
primer día
since the first day.
y después vinieron los otros días.
And then the other days came
Mi pueblo,
afterwards.
un pueblo pequeño,
My town was a small town,
azucarero,
mostly based on the sugar mill production, many sugar mills, factories around my town.
entre la gloria histórica que estuvo,
And among the historical glories we can mention,
fue oponerse al gobierno de Machado.
it was that we
Batista,
opposed Machado's government before Batista.
y puede oponerse a la entrada de los ingleses
First, and we also opposed the entry of the British people.
que entraron por el río Sagua Grande,
They wanted to enter Cuba through Sagua La Grande
desde
River
Isabela de Sagua,
and Isabela de Sagua.
entraron directo. Para ahí pasaron los primeros ingleses.
The first British people that wanted to invade Cuba wanted to do it through that place.
Los abuelos de aquella época
And my grandparents from that epoch,
se opusieron también.
they
a que
opposed
entrara.
the entry of the British army in Cuba through my town.
El hambre era mucho.
Hunger was there a
Los
lot.
pobres no tenían derecho.
Poor people didn't have rights.
Los negros no eran personas.
Black people were not human beings.
Y
Were not-
menos que los negros, las mujeres no eran personas.
and even less than the black people, women were not considered
Esa es la
persons.
verdad histórica de aquel momento.
That's the historical truth about that moment.
Tengo que dejarle a ella hacer algo porque si no,
I need to
sin
let them do
trabajar no
something
pueden.
if they need to work too.
No pueden tener el aplauso de ustedes.
If they
At that point, he's like, "Oh, I gotta let these other people talk too." I'm yapping too much, but very very fascinating. So Victor Drake, who we later see getting involved with Castro and the Castro revolution, who very often it would be him and Che Guevara and Fidel Castro doing military strategizing, revolutionary strategizing. He got his start protesting Batista day one. He's 15 years old. It's his 15th birthday. He's in jail because he was protesting Batista the day of the coup, right? Yeah, maybe I can put together a doc. That would be interesting. On Cuba. I gotta find stuff for it. So, under Batista, here's what's going on with the Cuban economy, all right? The United States controls 80% of Cuban trade under Batista. The United States firms are the ones running Cuba's public utilities. 2/3 of the food in Cuba comes from U.S. owned businesses under Batista. The United States developers are owning half of the arable land in Cuba. Unemployment is over 25%. Over 1 in 4 people in Cuba do not have a job. Havana gets turned basically into Las Vegas. It's a place for gambling and drugs and prostitution. The United States provides Batista with a military to back whatever he wants to do, with money, with all the support in the world to run Cuba as a dictatorship on behalf of Western business interests. Foreigners get to the point in general where they own 70% of all arable land. Remember, United States developers own 50%. An additional 20% is owned by other people outside of the country as well, right? Oh, Hamburger. Oh, hi. Welcome back. I'm so sorry to hear that. Well, stick with us. We're talking about Cuba. I hope you're doing okay. Remember to prioritize yourself. We've missed you. The relationship between Batista and the United States Mafia is also of growing concern. Let's see if we can find some info on this because it is pretty intense. When people tell you the U.S. mob ran Havana, this is what they're talking about. I'm going to see if we can find some supplementary info here. We've got a lot. We've got CubaMafia.com. We've got Cigar Aficionado. I don't know how trustworthy any of these things are. Very, very fascinating. Okay, here we go. We got an Al Jazeera. What are you going to do? You know? Not perfect, but we'll do it. We'll take a look at this. This is the U.S. and Cuba History of Organized Crime. We're talking about the CFR. Here we go. Valerie Wirtschafter, who is a research associate, says the hotel industry in particular in Cuba today, including the state-run Hotel Nacional in Havana, seems to glorify the country's gangster past, a violent history that partially spurred popular support for Fidel Castro's revolution. Now, she is from the Council on Foreign Relations. We look at their stuff sometimes to get kind of a mainstreamy assessment of what's going on. We're like, what is the mainstream kind of more politically literate arm of the very American mainstream liberal right perspective saying? That's where she comes from when she's saying this, which is pretty interesting. But she says it's equally bewildering, the collision of universes that transpired when Paris Hilton and Castro's son were photographed taking selfies together at a Havana cigar festival in February. Very, very interesting. Nowhere does the article, Al Jazeera says, mention a certain past far more bewildering, that Cuba's gangster past and violent history was a product of U.S. government policies and machinations by the American mafia. In the wake of Castro's triumph, both entities continue to help ensure that Cuba was continually by counter-revolutionary violence. Historian Jack Colhoun documented the evolution of the nexus between the American state and organized crime in his exhaustively researched book, Gangsterismo, The United States, Cuba, and the Mafia from 1933 to 1966. Cuba's debut as what Calhoun called a neo-colony of the United States took place at the end of the 19th century when the latter intervened in the Cuban War from Spain, for the independence of Cuba from Spain, right? Effectively nipping the whole independence option in the bud and appointing itself Cuba's new master. The arrangement led to the U.S. appropriation of Cuban territory for a naval base cum future torture center at Guantanamo Bay, along with other goodies. By the mid-20th century, Colhoun wrote, wrote, Cuba had become a virtual economic appendage of the United States, with Americans controlling many of its sugar mills, railways, and utilities, and inundating the island with U.S. brands. The author detailed how the establishment of a mafia gambling colony in Cuba, starting in the 1930s, was facilitated by a special relationship between North American mobsters and Batista, two-time Cuban ruler and one-time dictator. Batista received a cut of the profits from mafia operations and oversaw the conversion of Cuba into a full-fledged gangster state. The casinos provided money laundering opportunities for other lucrative businesses as well. Like in 1946, the mafia-run Hotel Nacional hosted a summit of U.S. underworld leaders to lay the foundations for converting the island into a heroin trafficking hub. When the Cuban Revolution brought down the curtain of the gangster state, Colhoun explained, which we'll get into later, we haven't got into that yet, the mobsters regrouped with their corrupt political allies in the Cuban exile movement in the United States. Right? There, they squared the circle of gangsterismo by plotting with the CIA to assassinate Castro, which we will get into. All right, so we'll get into this in a second, but just to give you some context for this, this is what was going on under Batista. Batista was working with the mafia in the United States and the United States government to ensure that business running in Cuba, and in particular in Havana, was very, very profitable for Western businesses. Oh, thank you for gifting subs. Yay. Obses. Thank you. Yay, yay, yay. So from all of this, it wasn't just the mob and Batista profiting. U.S. international companies, like multinational companies, were making a ton of money off of this as well. And remember, there were still sugar plantations going on too. So in Havana, in the city center, it was mobster, gangster, Las Vegas, city of sin vibes or whatever. But in other more rural parts of Cuba, they were being exploited with American-backed sugar plantations still. The students at the time started protesting the Batista government, just like we saw Victor Drake said. People started really pushing back against this. They did not like this. And Batista had a secret police and took control of the media to try to stop, basically, this protest movement from happening. Now, his secret police was explicitly called the Bureau for the Repression of Communist Activities. So early on, these protesters were linked with communism. And just as the Red Scare was going on and the Cold War was going on in the United States, that was exported to Cuba. And these protesters were seen as being an arm of communism. So this is kind of what was happening there, right? Now, I have another video that I'm going to show you guys that talks about some of the problems going on before the revolution. Unfortunately, I didn't film enough. Some of the video, I did film more, but a lot of videos got deleted when my phone did the weird thing. This is in the Fidel Castro Center in Havana. And I want to point out something that's interesting as well. When Fidel Castro died, he said that they were not allowed to name things after him in Havana. He didn't want streets named after him. He didn't want plazas named after him. And the reason he said is that he wanted to make sure he did not become a cult of personality type figure in Havana. He thought that would compromise the ongoing lifespan of the revolution. He really wanted people to not associate the revolution with him, but with socialism. And we'll see that when we do Theory Thursday tomorrow and we read some of his writings. So the only place in all of Cuba that is named after him is the Fidel Castro Center, which is a museum to his life, sure, but also to the revolution. And that's it. That's the only place allowed to be named after him on all of the island. So I recorded a little bit of this where they're talking about the problems, but it's not all of it, but I'm going to show you nonetheless. It's only 11 seconds. But when you go in, there's a whole room. One side is dedicated to the problems that were going on under Batista, and the next room is dedicated to how they solved them. So over here, if we zoom in on this, you'll see 665,000 Cubans without a job, right? People are homeless. People are hungry. People are living in weird shacks they make out in the middle of nowhere because they don't have any source of income and they can't afford to live somewhere. It was really, really bad. So I'm just going to play you a little 10-second clip of this to get this idea.
Was something ridiculous. A number is ridiculous to us. To a little accent. Mm-hmm.
So over here you can see pictures of the conditions of the rural poverty, right? And I know it's pretty bad quality. I'm so sorry. Let's see if we can like at least zoom into it for you guys. Even though it's low quality, you might be able to get a general sense of it. Zoom in. It won't let me zoom into it. But you know, this was housing conditions. Like these are like slum houses, right? This is everything falling apart. There were starving children, starving people everywhere. The conditions under Batista were bad. Really, really, really bad. And this is what people were protesting. If you went with a flotilla, would you stay at a small boutique hotel or a 5-star hotel? I went to Cuba. I did go. I was part of the Nuestra America convoy. But I'm American. So what you need to know is where Americans can stay is tightly controlled on the island. We don't get to stay in where we stay. The United States government only lets us stay in privately owned enterprises legally because of the blockade. And most of the privately owned enterprises are 5-star hotels. Some Airbnbs are okay, but when 600 people hit that island, all from the United States, not all of them from the United States, a lot of them from the United States, in addition to their normal tourism that they were receiving, people did not really have much of an option on where to stay. Now, my group stayed actually at a nonprofit center. We didn't stay at a hotel, but that's because my group has a long-standing traditional history with doing activism work in Cuba. So we didn't need to stay in hotels. We stayed at the Martin Luther King Center, which is a Christian nonprofit there. So we stayed basically in bunk beds in small rooms. So we had 4 bunk beds in a room. The room was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet at the biggest. However, the people who did stay in 5-star hotels, you need to understand you're getting propagandized by that. They are trying to paint a picture for you that these out-of-touch activists went to Cuba to help and actually did more harm than good. Why? Because they want to distract you. Because 600 people got together around the world to do an objectively good thing, to raise awareness about Cuba and what the United States blockade is doing to them and the history of imperialism in Cuba. And they were trying to distract you from those people's message. They were trying to shoot the messenger. They were trying to tell you shouldn't listen to the messages that those people bring back because those people are bourgeois LARPers. Those people are out of touch influencers. And that is not true at all. So you need to realize you're being propagandized too, right? As somebody who did not stay in a hotel, I understand why other people did stay in a hotel and why they had to. And so when the focus is shifted to things like that, like this idea that somehow the people going to help Cuba were doing more harm than good, that is propaganda 100% designed to discredit these people so that you don't listen to what they're telling you. So you think they are out of touch and there's nothing they can teach you about Cuba. That is not real. That is not true. And I can tell you nobody in Cuba was mad we were there. And nobody. We met the president, welcomed us, had a welcoming ceremony for us, spoke to us for 30 minutes to say they were so grateful for us coming. The organizations that were there that brought people, they are not people who just showed up out of nowhere. Those are people who've been going to Cuba every year, multiple trips a year, going back like 30 years to protest the blockade. This was nothing new, and people there were not mad we were there. People were stopping us on the street. Strangers were stopping us on the street from Cuba to thank us for coming. And their main thing they wanted from all of this was for us to come back to the United States and tell you what they, the Cuban people on the island, actually think. So when the U.S. government tells you these people are out of touch LARPers and you don't need to listen to them, what they're really doing is trying to discredit any information people are telling you about what's really going on in Cuba. So you need to realize that's propaganda working in your brain, and you need to stop that. Okay? Yeah, Virgo, it's absurd to blame the humanitarian trip for power outages because even if there was actual evidence of it, it wouldn't be concerned if the oil blockade and sanctions didn't exist. Exactly. And the trip had nothing to do with power outages whatsoever. Like, you know. By any means necessary. A real activist would have stayed in a tent in the jungle if they actually cared about Cubans, people who don't want to help Cubans. Yes. And I will say this, that like when the island went out of power, we lost power, right? I didn't have running water because the water pump stopped working when the electricity went out and couldn't pump water to our room. I didn't take a hot shower the entire time I was there. The food I ate was cooked for me by Cuban people in the Martin Luther King Center. And they had to cook on open fires when they ran out of power. So, you know, we were really living that experience, right? But the reason Cuban people really wanted us there, and we did bring them aid. My organization brought $500,000 worth of solar panels to them. We brought multiple packages of solar lights as well, sanitary supplies, etc., medications that they were needing. But really, and all the Cuban people were grateful for that. They were like, thank you, yes, this is great. The main thing they wanted is for us to tell the world what was happening in Cuba. So I am telling you that Cuban people, even if somehow magically power was diverted to 5-star hotels during the entire shutdown of the island, which it wasn't, power was diverted to hospitals. That's who got priority power, not hotels. Even if that was true, the Cuban people would tell you that was the most important thing that especially Americans were doing there, is getting the message out to people in the United States about what was really going on in the island and what the Cuban people thought. So they would, that was what they thanked us for the most. Thank God you're here so you can go tell people. So you can tell people. So if you had social media influencers on the internet, hypothetically streaming to tens of thousands of people every single day about what was actually going on in Cuba, the Cuban people will tell you that was the coolest and most important thing that Americans could do. And they would need access to internet to do that. Yes, I'm American. Yes, I live in Los Angeles. So, yeah, it's very, very wild. So yeah, we're talking about Cuba for the next 2 weeks because I was in Cuba for six days, I believe, as part of the Nuestra America convoy. I was there, and that's what we're bringing back. And that's why also we're doing this. That's why we're doing 2 weeks of content. That's why I'm taking time off of my normal job to do 2 weeks of content with you about this, because when I was there, the Cuban people were like, this is the best way you can help us. The best way you can help us is to let people know, number one, the blockade is bad. It is annoying. It was horrible, and it should be ended. It is cruel. Number two, that doesn't mean we're dying. We're surviving. We've dealt with the blockade for years. We're surviving. We'll continue to survive. Number three, we will not give up. Our history is so rich and strong fighting against American imperialism. We value our revolution so much. We're not about to give it up. We're not backing down. And number four, those Cuban Americans in the United States, we don't claim them. We don't claim them, and they need to stop talking for us. And that is it. Those are the 4 points these people really wanted to get across to you. So that is why I took time away from my normal job to do this, because they were like, the most important thing you can do is tell people this. And I'm like, fuck, okay, I got to dedicate more time to streaming, to content about Cuba. This is my now obligation after talking to these people and hearing from them what they really thought the most important thing was. So yes, Viva Cuba. Hasta la victoria siempre, Cuba. Yes. So that's what we're doing here today. Yes, it is important not to portray people as defeated when emphasizing the cruelty the U.S. commits upon them. Yes, exactly. Hegel's big dialecticals. And that is really what's important. They have not fallen. They are not, and it's hard because the blockade is genocidal. Our intent is genocide. We want to kill them, but we are not killing them. And that is important. It is important to both point out that the American cruelty, the genocidal intention of the blockade, how just fucked up and evil the blockade truly is against these poor people who have done absolutely nothing wrong, but also to say, as the Cuban doctor said, which I'm not sure if I recorded her saying this part or not, but the director of a hospital told me, and I've said this a couple times I think already, when you have a really hard teacher in school and you hate them because they make your life so difficult, but you learn the most in that class. She's like, yeah, the blockade is our teacher. We hate the blockade, but we learn so much from it, and we keep learning every day, and we learn how to survive this, and we get more creative, and we get more ingenuitive because we have to, but we get better. It is siege conditions, exactly. So that's really important. I wonder how much the Cuban Americans are getting paid on TikTok because they're hard at work. I know. It's crazy. I wonder if they're getting paid, honestly, from all these lobbying groups and stuff. Okay, so we have just a few more seconds left of this video. I'm going to play it just a little bit more. Oops.
58 was something ridiculous. The number is ridiculous to us, to a little accent. Mm-hmm. Then we have the problem education.
So they call them the problems of. So it's like the problem of education, the problem of housing, the problem of employment, the problem of healthcare, the problem of maybe literacy, I think was the fifth one. Marxist Gamer Zero says, I venture to say, my fellow citizens, that this is something more tremendous than war. It is a terrible remedy. It does not cost a life outside the nations boycotted, but it brings a pressure upon that nation, which, in my judgment, no modern nation could resist. This is Woodrow Wilson explaining the sanctions in 1919. Wow. Yep, exactly. Feel something. You saw me at the Kneecap concert. Cute. Hi. It was fun. Did you get in the mosh pit? Yeah, the housing question, the literacy question. Exactly. These are the issues that they were dealing with under the Batista regime. Do you see people are currently detained, arrested after getting back today? Somebody said that Chris Maltz posted that he was detained. They probably weren't getting arrested. They were getting detained by customs. And yeah, that happened. That happened to a few people on my journey too, my trip. I was not detained, but I was pulled aside by a customs agent. Additionally, after going through customs, after going through baggage claim and about to exit, I was spotted. Somebody like looked and like saw me out of a crowd and was like, you come over here. So they definitely knew who was there for the flotilla. Definitely. Yeah. When you learned Palestinians go to school in Cuba to become doctors, I know there's all people. Yeah. And when we talk about healthcare, we're going to see it. We played this yesterday in yesterday's video, which if you didn't see yesterday's video, go watch yesterday's video. It's a really, really, really good video. It's the overview of the whole experience. It's still up on my page and it's exported to my YouTube. But you can see the director of a hospital being like, oh, we have Palestinian students here who learn how to be doctors and they're the best students we have. And you can see, I actually talked about a quote from somebody from the Palestinian Youth Movement, PYM, who was on our brigade with us, who had to get a surgery in Palestine, and it was when they were under siege conditions. They didn't have access to a lot of power, and she was really, really scared. And she's like, what if the power goes out? What if this happens? What if this happens? And her doctor in Palestine was like, don't worry, you're going to be fine, because I was trained by Cuban doctors. I know how to handle this. This is what they deal with all the time. And she said it was the best surgery experience she's ever had, and she never had a better one in the United States since. So you can see all of that stuff on yesterday's video, but we are going to do a day that's an entire deep dive on their medical system as well, which is really, really interesting. I did not run into Bad Empanada, but I will say Bad Empanada is one of those people who's really weird to me on the internet. Very, very weird. And this is what I mean when I'm like, when you're a content creator, you know when other content creators are normal people or when they move fucking weird. That's a guy who moves fucking weird. I don't know what to tell you. He's getting in fights. He's starting fights with me on Twitter. I'm like, just like, what are you doing, bro? And again, I just need to emphasize, I have the most baseline Marxist-Leninist politics on the planet. Nothing I think is controversial, right? I was on an international brigade of Marxist-Leninists. We all have the same politics. This just is a general Marxist-Leninist politic. I cannot imagine. I don't have any politics that fall outside of the general Marxist-Leninist politic either. I cannot imagine if I went out of my way to just randomly start attacking democratic socialists on the internet all day. I know we have different politics. What would be the utility in that? I can talk about democratic socialism as an ideology. I can talk about what I don't like about it. I can talk about it, in the Marxist context, the Marxist critiques of it. Why would I just start attacking random individuals who are democratic socialists? I don't understand this mindset. So people who do this to me, I'm like, you are just attacking a random Marxist-Leninist because I'm one of the most visible Marxist-Leninists on the internet. But I am just a regular person. I don't have political power. Right? That's why they have to make up lies to pretend like I'm more powerful than I am. They have to make up these lies like they're punching up. They're like, Madeline Pendleton's rich. I'm not rich. They're like, Madeline Pendleton's petite bourgeoisie. I'm not petite bourgeoisie. And if you read chapter 3 or volume 3 of Capital, you would know what Marx has to say about worker collectives. Sorry. I'm actually now, because we didn't get raises to match inflation, I'm low income in the city of LA again. I mean, the Twitch stream income is helping, but you guys know so far I've used it for donation stuff. So they have to make up these reasons to make it look like they're punching up when they attack me over very just baseline normal shit that's not offensive at all. It's just normal Marxist-Leninist politics. And that's what that Empanada guy did. I'm just like, why are you fucking doing this? This is so weird. I would never do this to you, even if I disagree with you. I disagree with people on the internet all day long. Attacking a random person without political power is weirdo behavior. It's fucking weirdo behavior. You're not punching up. That's just some random dude. And also, how do you have time for this? It's very, very weird. Yeah, it's 73K. It's not even 78. It's crazy. In LA, in Los Angeles, which is, I think the current HUD designations, you have to make 82K a year to be considered not low income there. It's very, very, very weird. Okay. So, 78,000 apartments I'm a landlord for. Yeah, when they make up lies that I'm a landlord, you're just like, what? Where are you guys even fucking coming up with this shit? But they have to do that to convince you that they are doing a good thing and they are punching up, that what they are doing is somehow activism. And it is not. It is not activism. You are not punching up, not just about me, but about any random person without political power, right? You can critique their ideas, you can critique their thoughts, you can engage in thoughtful critique, you can critique systems, you can critique ideologies, for sure. You usually don't need to use a random person who lacks political power's name to do that. Like, I can think of no argument I can make where it is better because I threw in a random guy on the street who has that political ideology into the mix. You know? It's not great. Very, very, very weird. Yeah, Pendleton criticisms, and it's all random ass lies. Yeah, they have a fucking subreddit where they make up stories about me, and then people see it and they're like, it's real. And what's funny is that I'm like, I make this joke a lot, but it's like, I came to understand how disinformation and propaganda truly works. As a person who studied disinformation and propaganda for my podcast, for a lot of work I've done, I actually came to understand it when I became a public figure, because I see how it works against me. I see how somebody sees a random thing on Reddit that's not true, and then they just say it on Twitter, and then other people say it on Twitter, and then next thing you know, it's just the truth. And I see that. And so when people are like, well, you're a landlord, I'm like, thank you for letting me know nothing you say politically has been vetted. That you are not a person who vets things, you're not a person who looks into things. Because I know I'm not a landlord, because I am me. So now I know everything you say is bullshit. Because you're just saying shit. You're just repeating things you saw on the internet, which is pretty wild. Daydream Beyond, you notice there are some that will punch at other leftists in order to try to poach their followers. You've seen people do that, and it's shitty. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. Very, very strange. Conservatives and liberals. Yeah, and it's a lot of liberal women. It's a lot of liberal women. A lot of the people who hate me are liberal women. Very, very interesting. It's really wild. But, what are you going to do? I was actually surprised they let me get away with being a communist for so long. I was like, wow, I expected this sooner, honestly. They let me do it for around 3 years. But, I got too beloved. I was reaching too many people. And there has to be backlash at a certain point, right? You can't keep doing that. Oh, in a leftist server, someone told me I was racist and clipped the one-legged hijabi video over and over again. Yeah, and it's wild, because if you listen to that video, what am I doing? I'm critiquing elite capture. I'm saying, yeah, the Democratic Party is, so basically there was this woman who's a black trans woman who had a Palestinian partner who made a video saying that it was evil to basically vote for third parties and not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024. And everyone's like, you should debate her. And I was like, and she used my name a whole bunch, brought my name up out of nowhere. I'd never heard of her before. And I was like, but she had a huge following on YouTube. And I was like, I'm not going to debate that woman. She's a black trans woman with a Palestinian partner. And a lot of, Democrat white liberals kept using her. Well, this woman. She's an example of why you're evil. She's an example of why she's a black trans woman. You need to listen to her tell you that you need to vote for the war criminal who committed genocide, for Lady Hitler. You need to vote for her because this black trans woman told you to. And it was like, they're literally, she's the one-legged solo poly hijabi meme, right? At this point. They have dehumanized her to the point of meme status to justify their bad politics, their ignorant politics, their politics of white supremacy, of genocide, of oppression, their transphobic politics. Joe Biden signed the first federal anti-trans legislation in decades here in the United States. Kamala Harris told Fox News, a very, very conservative right-wing news source, that she would follow the law on trans rights in the year of the most anti-trans legislation being introduced in the country. They literally did ethnic cleansing, and it doesn't matter because you found a black trans woman with a Palestinian partner to tell you that you have to vote for these evil fucks or there's something wrong with you. And I'm like, I'm not gonna win. I can't debate that. Whatever. You either listen to her or you don't. But all these white liberals out here dehumanizing this person, making her into the memification of identity politics to try to convince you that you're a bad person for not supporting genocide, not supporting ethnic cleansing, not supporting white supremacy. It's a joke. It's garbage. It's garbage, and I'm not going to do it. right? And furthermore, there are plenty of black trans women who are communists. There are plenty of Palestinians who are communists. It's just a silly idea to even come up with. But that is why. And people are like, you're racist. And I'm like, girl, if you don't shut your mouth. Like, and this is, and you know, here's the thing. I deal with that, obviously. It's black communists who deal with this even more than me. When I talk to black communists and I tell you they are tired, they are so tired, and they encounter this all the time. And that's what's absolutely wild to me. And so that woman that the whole thing happened about, she wrote a whole think piece about me. She wrote a whole blog post about me. And one of the most fucking disrespectful things I saw in that blog post is she said, I don't doubt that there are plenty of black people that Madeline surrounds themselves with who agree with their politics, but, and went on to discredit the work of black Marxist radicals in a state. This woman lives in LA. She lives in the same city as me. She lives in California. How are you going to go on the internet and discredit the work of black Marxist Leninists in California? Our black radicals here are the Black Panther Party. They are Marxist Leninists. How are you going to act like they are somehow beholden to white interests and downplay their agency? To downplay their leadership in our movements. That is the thing that to me, I was like, this makes me fucking sick. Like, these are the people leading our movements. They are not ignorant buffoons following around white people. And to say that is so disrespectful. Sorry, I'm going to cry thinking about it. It's so fucked up, you know? Just what the hell is wrong with these people? You know, pretty wild. Pretty wild and disrespectful. Very, very horrible. So anyway, this is the thing about this stuff. Okay, so a nice little kind of diversion, but let's get into the rest of this kind of content, right? Let's get back into this. So, under the Batista regime and Cuba, a lot of people were experiencing a lot of oppression. And to rope it back in, they were dealing with a lot of racial oppression. Afro-Cubans on the island were highly oppressed. So when Victor Drake says, yeah, I joined the revolution when Batista seized power in the coup as a black person, as a poor person, these things were very, very heavily related to each other. They were. And it's something I really, again, I want to hammer home that I said yesterday. When you look at these videos, remember, when you look at videos of Cuba, those are all communists. Those are all communists. So again, this idea that communism is this like weird privileged white person thing, there are billions of communists on this planet, and most of them are not white, and most of them are not privileged. Right? So when we look at Victor Drake, that's a communist. That is a black communist. And he's admirable, and he is resolute in his beliefs and what he stands for. And you see the conditions they were coming from under white liberalism, under US-backed liberalism, right? The liberalism of the free market, the liberalism of, oh, but we taught some of you how to read. And you see why they're mad. You see why they're justifiably pissed, right? At these conditions. They can't live. They're living in abject poverty. Pretty crazy. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Now, let's get back to my little notes. So Batista introduces, to stop people like Victor Drake, right, who we just saw the video of, Batista introduces his secret police called the Bureau for the Repression of Communist Activities. And that's on purpose. Remember, anti-communism always accompanies fascistic tendencies, brutal repression, and degradation of human rights. And they have the audacity to say we're committing human rights abuses with no proof, no evidence. Meanwhile, we're running literal fucking torture camps in Cuba. And that we have evidence of that. That's real. That's not a thing people just made up. So Batista introduces his anti-communist secret police to try to stop people like Victor Drake. Now, this gets us to Fidel Castro. So, here are some things you need to know about Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro is like our boy Ingalls, right? Fidel Castro comes from a well-off family, a petit bourgeois family, maybe even a bourgeois family. His family owns several small businesses in Cuba, to the extent that there's one area that's called Castro Town, because they basically just own everything, which is very, very interesting. So he was going to school to become a lawyer. That was his thing. And then what's funny is Castro was 6'3". So in Cuba at the time, that was massive. So even his mom said when he was born, she was like, "This is a horse. I have given birth to a horse." And this is something Cuban people remark about over and over and over again, is how large Castro was. 6'3", you know, is pretty large. But at the time in particular, he was seen as being this very massive man. So he went to school to become a lawyer, and after he got his law degree, he actually tried to legally remove Batista from power. He gathered petitions. He tried to find all these ways to legally remove Batista from power using what he had learned. Fidel Castro. He also ran for the Chamber of Representatives. He tried to do everything within the power structure that already existed to get rid of Batista, right? And I think this is something important that we all kind of realize. A lot of people who experience liberalism and then end up becoming Marxist-Leninists, they do so when they realize the system is set up to stop you from taking political power. The system is set up to maintain the political power of people like Batista and make sure that average everyday people like Victor Drake never get political power. Right? The system is set up to be anti-communist at its core. And Castro at this time isn't necessarily a communist. He is just like, this Batista guy is bad and he's hurting people, right? That's what's going on. So when all of the legal options fail, he's like, something has to happen. So he teams up with his brother, Raul Castro. And they had been engaging in protest movements and things like this leading up to this point. But what comes next is what is called throughout Cuba the July 26th movement. And you'll see these flags. Let me see if I can find this flag in the background of one of the videos we were watching. You'll see it. The July 26th movement is this flag here in the background. These flags are all over Cuba. And this is what gets launched by Castro along with his brother Raul when they've exhausted all of their options to basically legally remove Batista from power. And they plan basically a coup to overthrow Batista on July 26, 1953. Now, this coup fails. It does not go well. A lot of people are killed, unfortunately. He gets together a lot of people to try to overthrow Batista. A lot of them die. And it's very, very bad. And Castro himself gets sentenced to 15 years in prison for this attempt to overthrow. The legal avenues attempted, he would circulate petitions, he would petition courts, he would try to find all these ways that Batista wasn't legitimate. He himself tried to run for the Chamber of Representatives to out-represent him in political arenas. Just nothing worked. The system was set up specifically to work against him. So, in 1955, though, Batista, under international pressure, releases a bunch of political prisoners and gives them amnesty. Everybody's like, hey, Batista, you're getting real fucked up over there. And Batista was getting real fucked up over there. Let's see if we can find some info about Batista. I'm going to find some info for you guys to go along with this. I found a Jacobin. I'm so sorry, it's a Jacobin, but we will take a look at it. They'll probably be correct about this, right? Batista's Bureau for the Repression of Communist Activities had a blood-spattered record of torture and political killings before 1959. That's a jump ahead. Remember, we're still in 1953. Here we go. This is Batista, this evil fuck, right? And then here's Richard Nixon, then U.S. Vice President. Oops, stretch. And hydrate. So, on May 4th, 1955 is when Batista set up the Bureau for the Repression of Communist Activities. This is also the same year he gave the amnesty to all of the political prisoners. Nixon was a really weird looking dude. So the CIA is who helped Batista do this. And this was 2 years after the coup attempt, right? Batista had taken power, we see in 1952 after a coup. We know all of that. But BRAC, the Bureau of Repression of Communist Activities, the secret police, spent the best part of 4 years brutally torturing and killing Batista's opponents before the revolution of 1959, which we'll get into. A declassified CIA document from the 1950s placed the formation of BRAC in the context of a wider clampdown on communist political activity under Batista. So let's take a look at this. Here is the document that we're looking at here, right? It's a bad one in terms of photocopy quality. Status and strength of a communist party in Cuba. Since the advent of the Batista regime in 1952, government measures restricting communist activity have included the suppression of communist publications, rupture of diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, outlawing of the Popular Socialist Party, PSP, communist, legislation against communists in public service, and control of communist travel and international communications. In May 1955, a BRAC bureau was organized to implement anti-communist legislation. The difficulties of the communists in propagandizing and organizing politically have resulted in a loss of rank and file following. The party remains very well organized, however, although forced to operate as a semi-covert organization. Alliances with non-communist political groups and infiltration of social groups are major communist objectives. Although the communists have lost much of their former strength, they have maintained some influence in sugar, tobacco, and maritime unions. So they were doing unionizing activity. Also in education, in youth and women's organizations, and in the entertainment field, especially in radio and broadcasting. The estimated membership of the Communist Party there was 12,000 at the time. Party units responsible for sabotage, assassination, kidnapping, or terrorist missions. No pertinent information is available. There is a possibility that the organization of terrorist actions may be assigned to certain leaders of local front organizations, the Association for the Defense of Democratic Rights. Sabotage training given within Cuba, no. Sabotage training given Cuban communists in communist bloc countries, like is the USSR training them, and they're like, no. Ooh. Sorry. I usually have sound turned off my computer, but I was getting a signal call. Sabotage, assassination, kidnapping, terrorist missions and targets. Any Americans? No. Any other ones? Maybe a lawyer was arrested in 1954 on charges of possessions of a homemade bomb and communist propaganda. Maybe he was trying to impede the elections. They don't really know. Evidence of any direction or support from the USSR or China or any other communist countries? No. Estimate of threat from local Communist Party sabotage. PSP would appear to have no policy and little capacity for organizing sabotage and terrorist action on a sizable scale. Individual PSP agitators conceivably could whip up demonstrations exploiting local grievances. It's also possible that they've been infiltrated into opposition political parties, but they don't really know. So this is what's going on at the time. Now, Batista, when he was Cuban president in 1942, not when he seized power in a dictatorship coup, he had been a military guy. He had a little presidential run for a couple years legally. He had established the Enemy Activities Investigation Services. And we did mention that earlier, but I don't know if you guys caught it. When they were like president 2 times, but dictator 1, that's what they're talking about. So this period of Batista influence, I really categorize very, very broadly. I go from 1934 to 1952. So in 1934, he got kind of involved in the military there in Ohio. So the Enemy Activities Investigation Services, SIAE, operated under the command of Captain Mariano Fajet Diaz, who had been educated in the United States. He received training from the basically CIA and other U.S. intelligence services in counter-espionage. So the United States was super, super active in the Batista regime. The CIA was super active in the Batista regime, right? After World War II ended, the focus shifted from the Axis powers and to the Soviet Union and the international communist movement. He became the director of BRAC when it was established in 1955. One Cuban revolutionary, Carlos Franqui, described him as a technician of torture who was capable of inflicting continuous blows to the head, leaving no marks but producing tremendous pain and tension. In July of 1955, CIA Director Allen Dulles wrote to Batista approving the dictator's decision to allow the CIA to train BRAC agents, saying, "The creation of the Cuban government of the Bureau for the Suppression of Communist Activities is a great step forward in the cause of freedom." They're torturing people for freedom. They're doing the doublespeak thing, right? "I am honored that your government has agreed to allow this agency to assist in the training of some of the officers of this important organization." What is the freedom? The freedom to be into capitalism. Not the freedom to have your own political beliefs whatsoever, right? Not in the freedom to be a communist, certainly. And not the freedom to not get tortured with continuous blows to the head. None of that. What's the freedom? The freedom for your boss to exploit you, right? And really ask yourself, what's that freedom? This is supposed to be a link. Oh yeah, here. Okay, this is Trabajadores de Cuba, and they talk about this. This was the source on that. So again, this is Jacobin. Take it what it is, but this is some good stuff we've been reading so far. And this is correct. Dulles went on to suggest that BRAC's general should travel to Washington to discuss techniques used by the CIA to combat the activities of international communism. Since Batista's 1952 coup, so remember, he was in the military, he was elected president, then he wasn't, and then he seized power in a coup and became a dictator. The military had already been dumping bullet-riddled corpses on the streets of Havana. BRAC institutionalized repressive violence, working in close collaboration with the Military Intelligence Service, SIM. SIM officers were tasked with the surveillance of people known to have communist sympathies or allegiances. Informers infiltrated unions and other movements in an attempt to rein in opposition to Batista's regime. Detainees were interrogated in 3 stages: persuasive talk, and then moving on to psychological torture, and then to physical torture. CIA agent Lyman Kirkpatrick euphemistically reported that BRAC might be too enthusiastic in some of its interrogations in terms of how much torture they were really doing on these people. Kirkpatrick recalled one instance where a doctor took photos of the torture wounds that BRAC agents inflicted upon a female school teacher after she was detained on suspicion of plotting against Batista. Remember, this is the United States, guys. We're all involved in this. This is what we're involved in. So when the United States government is like, Fidel Castro was a dictator, it's really like, girl, shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up, Batista was a horrific dictator that tortured people en masse, did horrific things to these people, all to keep them subjugated as a slave class to Western capitalist interests and the mob. And we're out here having the audacity to be like, Fidel Castro was a dictator. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. And this is very, very interesting. When you are in the real world, out in the world, and you talk to people, you're touching grass, right? And you're hearing from people, and you're learning the truth about history, and you're learning the truth about the world, and you're reading books, and you're like, oh my God, this is so horrible. And then you get on the internet, and 5 million brainwashed zombies come on here repeating some shit they saw in a headline once that was funded by the U.S. State Department. It's hard not to lose your mind. It's hard not to lose your mind with how confident and rude and wrong these people are, how conveniently they promote evil. But they're heavily propagandized. They're heavily propagandized. And that is why the Cuban people were like, the most important thing you can do is go back and tell the truth. They spread lies all the time. And the lies manufacture, the popular support at home to do horrible things to other countries. And I'll tell you this, the butcher of Pyongyang, right, was in Cuba. And watched as the president of Cuba gave a speech saying, they tell these lies about us. They call us dictators to justify the harm they do to us and our people. And I was staring into the back of this guy's head, just like, are you learning? Are you learning anything yet? Are you learning why you don't go on the internet and call all these world leaders in countries that are enemies of the United States, the greatest imperialist, violent, bloodthirsty threat to freedom on the planet, to safety on the planet, why you don't get on the internet and run your mouth in support of their international playbook? Why you don't do that? It is absolutely free to not do that. And this is why. This is the stuff that it backs up in finances, right? And I really hope he learned. I really hope he learned. And you know what? If that guy learns, if he comes all the way left, and he joins an org I'm a part of or that I work with, I will be very, very happy to welcome him. And this is the joke I make, that Marxist-Leninism is a bit like Catholicism, which is that when you get here, all your sins are absolved. All your past sins are absolved. We get it. We all fucked up. We've all made mistakes. Just what's important is that you get here, And we all joke about the bad shit. Oh God, when I was an anarchist, the shit I said about the USSR, horrible things. A very anti-communist activity that I was engaging in as a self-proclaimed anarcho-communist, right? We all do these things. And it's important that we learn and we apologize and we don't do that shit again, because it's bad. It's bad for people. And again, the thing I really want to emphasize here is that there are billions of Marxist-Leninists in the world, and they are trying to build communities that care for people against all odds, that care for people in a way that people living under Western capitalism will never understand or experience, right? And those are the movements we need to be supporting. Unless you're a Nazi. I mean, look, if you started out as a Nazi and you become a Marxist-Leninist, you're like, damn, that was fucked up. Is that not progress? Is that not good? Right? And that's the thing that's ultimately the most ironic, is that the liberals and the anarchists who want to call Marxist-Leninists authoritarians, they are the most carceral people on the planet. You will be, any past sins will never be forgiven with them. There's no opportunity for learning. There's no opportunity for progress. What Marxist-Leninists understand is that the way you encounter the world is structural. You are encountering the world through systemic institutions of oppression, of propaganda, of forced ignorance. We understand that you are not the systems that you exist under. And because of that, we understand that people can change. And with education and outreach, people can be fixed, because these are not natural states of being. No, you're not born naturally an evil, fucked up, ignorant person, right? Your conditions create that for you. So this is one of the things about, like, you know, how people are like, oh, and the communists have re-education camps. You have prisons. The capitalists have prisons. They have Guantanamo Bay. They have the highest rates of incarceration on the planet. We have schools to try to teach you to unlearn your fucked up ways, right? So it's very, very interesting. A remorseful Nazi? Yeah, right. You know, you're right. It's not like you're going to approach a Nazi who's actively doing harm to their community and be like, hey, brother, hey, friend, let me welcome you in. It's not worth the time. Not worth the fucking time. Right. But somebody who's like, hey, I ended up here and I have a really fucked up past, and I've learned from that. Okay. All right. You know, and it's the same thing as like veterans. We deal with this all the time with veterans. Veterans will come into left-wing movements and they'll be like, I was in the U.S. military. I did unspeakable things. I did unspeakable things. And you don't forgive them in terms of letting them off the hook and saying, it's okay, don't worry about it, you did great. You don't do that. You always hold them accountable for their past sins. You always say, yeah, that was fucked up. That was bad. That was horrible. And you're not off the hook for that. But it's good you're here now. Right? And they will often be the people who are hardest on themselves. Former members of the American military, of the U.S. military, who did unspeakable things in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that is sometimes the part of what radicalized them, being like, wait a minute, I grew up with this being normalized. This is not normal. What I'm doing is not normal. What I'm doing is evil. And you don't tell them, no, what you did wasn't evil. You never do that. You're like, yes, what you did was evil, but you're here now. Right? And so let's use your experiences to try to convince other people of the evils that exist here. Right? Let's use this. How do we work with this? So yeah, fuck you for your service. Now let's get to work, Brody says. Yep, exactly. Fuck you. But come on. All right, let's go. And, you know, that's the same energy we kind of bring. Your nephew was deployed to Afghanistan. He's now a Marxist-Leninist. That's Conrad Lilith. Yep. Yeah. So, all right. So we are torturing communists in Cuba under Batista. That's what we're up to here in the United States. Obligatory Lenin, the armed forces in the revolution. Yes. The only concern here that Washington expressed was for Batista's macabre tactics ultimately strengthening support for Castro's July 26th movement. And this is what they're afraid of. They don't want to make martyrs, right? They don't want to give you ammunition, and they don't want to make martyrs. It's strategic. So when Batista released all of the political prisoners, it wasn't because he suddenly had a change of heart and he really just cared about people in 1955. They were worried that it would give ammunition to the forces that would ultimately overthrow the government. And that's really important. According to Havana's morgue director, more than 700 bodies were brought to the morgue between 1952 and 1958 with evidence of having been severely tortured before they were killed. Batista's agents dumped the bodies of victims in the hills of Pinar del Rio in mass graves or at abandoned sites. There was a magazine that chronologized the torture and murder from the start of Batista's dictatorship in 1952 until 1958. One example of the repression was the killing of 23 revolutionaries in Oriente province between December 23rd and December 26th in 1956. The victims were tortured, killed, and dumped in various public places in a bid to instill terror. They would leave their tortured, disfigured bodies in public to terrify people into submission. Members of the revolutionary movement later captured and executed Colonel Firmin Cowley Gallegos, who had given the order for the massacre. On February 19th, 1959, an order from Camilo Cienfuegos dissolved BRAC and other repressive institutions of the Batista dictatorship. One U.S.-trained BRAC official, Jose Castaño Quevedo, was executed after the revolution, although the CIA station chief sent Andrew St. George, a journalist, to plead with Che Guevara for Castaño's life. Most of them had already fled the country. And many of them came to the United States and started working with the CIA. Okay, hydrate. Okay. So let's get back into this. Hello, Jim of Berg. We're doing it. Now, Fidel Castro, we're back on him, young lawyer. What's going on at the time? The July 26th movement. He teams up with his brother, Raul Castro, and he tries to stage a revolution and overthrow Batista, and it doesn't work. A lot of people die, and he ends up in prison for 15 years. And in 1955, Batista releases the prisoners, the political prisoners, in an effort to, pressure release valve. Was it Virgo who said that? Where it's like the Democratic Party operates in the United States as like a release valve to relieve pressure so that everything doesn't explode here and we don't get a communist revolution. I think it was maybe Virgo who said that. But that's what was going on here. It was a pressure release valve situation. So Fidel and his brother Raul, when they get released from prison, they go into exile in Mexico. Yeah, I think it was Virgo. It was really, really good. So in Mexico, the Castro brothers meet an Argentinian revolutionary named Che Guevara. So this is where like our dream team gets founded. This is our dream team situation. And they get together and they're like, we're going to work together to finally overthrow Batista once and for all. All right. So that's what's going on here so far. Che is baby girl. They were in prison for 2 years, only 2 years. So December of 1956, Castro, Che, and Castro's brother Raul all get together for this plot. Now I have another video to show you guys about the revolutionaries who joined them in this cause. And this is another video from the revolutionaries that we got to meet with. So hold please. One sec, sorry. You hear it before I show you. I don't know if it's like weird.
Lo que tengo que decir es que lo que ha dicho el comandante sobre el por qué se hizo revolucionario es común a todos.
What I have to say, and it's what Comandante said, why did we become revolutionaries? That is something that is common to all of us.
Algunos nos integramos más tarde, otros más temprano.
Some of us were involved later,
Pero
some of them earlier.
las razones son esas que él expresó.
But the reasons are the ones that he mentioned.
Ya. Yo agregaría lo siguiente.
And I will add the following.
Yo nací un 26 de julio.
I was born on July 26th.
Seleccionaron mi día para poder hacer el asalto cuartel Moncada.
They
Yo
selected
orgullosa
my
de
day
eso.
for Moncada Garrison, and I'm really
Y mi
honored.
familia igual, una familia humilde, obrera,
I am coming from a humble working class family,
un vínculo muy cercano descendiente de africanos.
a close link, inherited from Africa.
Todos trabajaban en el puerto de La Habana
All of them were working in Havana
como
Harbor,
estibadores.
stevedores,
Y el momento del triunfo de la revolución ya para toda la familia y para mí en particular, que era muy pequeña en ese momento,
at the
fue
moment
algo
of the
grande.
triumph of the revolution, for the whole family, and for me in particular, I was very little at that time.
Wait, we just got a rate of 1,500 people? Oh my god. Hi, everybody. Hi. Wow. So many people. Welcome, everyone. I just want to pause this and give you guys some context for what we're talking about right now as you guys come in. Majority Report rated into Caroline Quantiu. Oh, cool. Love it. We love to see it. Nice. For Majority Report, technically. Hi, everyone. Wow. I love the left-wing community here on Twitch. It's so great. Welcome, everybody. Good. You guys picked a good raid to drop in on. It was a good one. So we are talking about my trip to Cuba. I was on the convoy to Cuba, and we were doing 2 weeks of Cuba content. So yesterday we did an overview, all the details about the convoy, including the hotels everybody stayed at. I stayed at a nonprofit called the Martin Luther King Jr. Center. And today we're talking about the overview of Cuba's history, the history of American imperialism there, and the revolution. So what I have pulled up on screen is 3 revolutionaries we met with in Cuba who are telling us about why they joined Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and Raul Castro in the bid to overthrow the dictator Batista, who was backed by the United States and the CIA. I stayed in a 10-star hotel that pulled all the power for Cuba. Yeah. Yep. And then I went around coughing COVID onto them all. Like that. I will say, though, I always say this. The people who tell you to mask and you should mask, they're not wrong. They're objectively correct, right? They're objectively correct, and nobody should stop them from saying it. They are correct. You know, I try to remember to do my best. I'm pretty bad at it. So I take weekly COVID tests. But I did take a weekly COVID test before I went there. Molecular test before I got on the island. I don't know about other people. But, you know, I don't hate the maskers. I don't hate the maskers. I just hate when they get weird about shit. When they're like, you know, weird about like ADHD or OCD or things like that other people are dealing with. I'm like, okay, that's not sure. But yeah, pretty good. Okay, so yeah, Win Public Health. Cuba has a great public health system. They're amazing. It's great. Yeah, all of that is good. Okay, so everybody, I'm gonna get back into this. I'll start it over actually because we're only a minute in. But these are 3 revolutionaries that we met with. This is Victor Drake. So if you know anything about African liberation movements, you might be familiar with him. If you know about Cuban liberation movements, you're probably going to be familiar with him. He's an icon. He's a legend. This man, I always forget this man's name. I am so sorry. But he was the first ambassador of Cuba to Angola, I believe. Or fought in the Angola War. Maybe he was an ambassador to a different country. But he was heavily involved in Cuban and African affairs. Thank you. And this woman is Victor Drake's wife, who worked as a doctor during the revolutionary period and was involved in the revolution as well. Yeah, I personally bought a Cuban hospital to renovate it into a 5 quadrillion-star hotel that all the activists stayed at. Yeah, exactly. That's where all the power went, actually. Yeah. Yeah, we got a wife guy here for sure. And she was super funny. She was just like, oh, this guy won't stop talking. She's like keeping everybody on track, on point. I have got a great video about her later when we do the topic of how Cuba's government is structured. So for everybody new here, for the next 2 weeks, every day is dedicated to a different topic about Cuba. So yeah, today we're going over the history and the revolution, but I'll give you guys the rest of the schedule so you know if you want to drop in. We are also doing, where is it? Twitch Plan Day 2. Tomorrow we're going to do, we do Theory Thursday. We read left-wing political theory on Thursday. So we're going to be reading Castro's on Marxist-Leninism. Friday, we're going to do the whole government structure of Cuba. And it's going to be really, really interesting. I'm going to have a lot of good videos for you guys to watch. Monday, we're going to do a deep dive into their healthcare system, including their hospitals, their vaccinations, their pharmacies, their local doctors, their maternity wards, their policy of exporting doctors abroad. And we're going to have videos of people we met with everywhere. I have videos for all of this of people we met with. Tuesday, we're going to be doing a deep dive into their education system, their literacy campaigns, including a CIA plot to murder literacy teachers there to make them look bad. Elementary schools, we'll hear from elementary school kids about how their schools work, and college students as well. Oh yeah, I also gulagged hotel employees while I was there. That's so true. And then next Wednesday, we're going to be talking all about the sanctions against the people there. The following Thursday, we'll be doing a little bit more theory. And then next Friday, we'll be wrapping it up with the expat community in Cuba and what's going on with them, the diaspora community in Cuba. So, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So, yeah, stick around. It's going to be really, really good. Yes, and I do use they, them pronouns. Thank you for clarifying that, Kobashi. I love. Okay, so we're going to start this video that I have pulled up. And we're talking about the revolution. And you got to a good part. So, in the timeline of Cuba's history, Fidel Castro has just staged a failed revolution attempt. He's got sent to prison. The dictatorship, because everyone was getting mad, released all the political prisoners to be like, okay, fine, don't overthrow us. He and his brother went into exile in Mexico where they met Che Guevara. Now, they get together and they're like, we're going back to Cuba and we're taking this Batista guy out once and for all. Now, this guy, all these people were involved in that revolution. So we're going to hear them talk about why they joined the revolution. And sorry, the video camera footage is really, really shaky. I apologize. I didn't stabilize it before we started doing this.
Lo que tengo que decir es que lo que ha dicho el comandante sobre el por qué se hizo revolucionario es común a todos.
What I have to say, and it's what Comandante said, why did we become revolutionaries? That is something that is common to all of us.
Algunos nos integramos más tarde, otros más temprano.
Some of us were involved later,
Pero
some of them earlier.
las razones son esas que él expresó.
But the reasons are the ones that he mentioned.
Ya. Yo agregaría lo siguiente.
And I will add the following.
Yo nací un 26 de julio.
I was born on July 26th.
Seleccionaron mi día para poder hacer el asalto al cuartel Moncada.
They
Yo
selected
orgullosa
my
de
date
eso.
for Moncada Garrison, and I'm really
Y mi
honored.
familia igual, una familia humilde, obrera,
I am coming from a humble working class family,
un vínculo muy cercano o descendiente de africanos.
a close link, inherited from Africa.
Todos trabajaban en el puerto de La Habana
All of them were working in Havana
como
Harbor,
estibadores.
stevedores,
Y el momento del triunfo de la revolución ya para toda la familia y para mí en particular, que era muy pequeña en ese momento,
at the
fue
moment
algo
of the
grande.
triumph of the revolution, for the whole family, and for me in particular, I was very little at that time, the revolution was something huge.
Nací en un solar, no sé si conocen lo que es
I
solar,
don't know if you know the term solar in Cuba. It's like a hole
donde viven varias familias.
and different families in rooms living, a yard at the back, el patio atrás, el baño, el lavadero.
Lo que en este caso todos éramos familia.
In that case, but in this case, all the people living in that solar were family members.
Y por la revolución y con la revolución,
And,
todos salimos del solar.
and thanks to the revolution, and because of the revolution, we all left that very poor place.
Los mayores pudieron trabajar vinculados a su actividad específica.
And then all the members of the family started working in their specific activities.
Se hicieron universitarios
They became university graduates.
y todos hoy viven en residencias normales,
And today
simples,
they live in normal houses
en la ciudad de La Habana,
in Havana City,
incluyendo nuestra familia.
including our family.
Mis hermanas todas hicieron misiones internacionalistas
All
en
my
Angola,
sisters fulfilled international missions in Angola.
yo en Guinea-Bissau,
I went to Guinea-Bissau.
y el resto de la familia casi todos somos internacionales.
And in the rest of the family, almost everyone in my family has done international missions.
Respondiendo a las bondades de la Revolución Cubana.
Because we need to have a response
No podemos fallar.
to the good things the revolution did for our family. We cannot fail the revolution
Porque es nuestra vida.
because the revolution is our life.
So I love that video. I love hearing from them. And they're just talking about how the conditions under Batista were so bad that they had to join a revolution to survive, right? Let me see if I can find an example of the housing situation she is talking about. Trying to find it really fast to see if I can show you. They were called solares, but everything's just pulling up solar energy because of the name of it, and that's what's in the news right now. Okay. Looking for photos of this for you. Oh, they're tenement homes. Here we go. We've got something from the University of Arizona. Let's see if this pulls it up. This is a student paper. So this is described, though. A tenement house, the rural poor and bohemios, thatched huts. The urban poor largely lived in shanty towns and slums and solares. So that's what she was referencing in that video, where she was like, if you know what the solares are, basically multiple families would live together in this tenement housing. And it was really, really, really bad conditions for them. And that's what she and her family lived in at the time. So very bad conditions happening. Oh, hype train incoming. We got a hype train. Now, all these people like those three people we just saw, get together with Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and Che Guevara. And on December 1956, they get 82 armed fighters to lead this revolution attempt again. 70 of them are killed in clashes. So Castro and 12 other men retreat to the mountains. There, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, oh, gifters, yay, thank you everybody. We got some gifties. Yay, yay, yay. They end up launching a guerrilla campaign where they keep on fighting. And this fighting goes on a while, and they gather more men. This is through the process through which Castro eventually ends up with the M4 Sherman tank that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. And this is really, really funny because at the Fidel Castro Center, when they're talking about this history in Cuba, they're just kind of like, oh yeah. And then, you know, whatever. And then the tank happened. No big deal. Anyway, moving along. And you're like, wait. How did he get a tank? Right? Well, the United States had basically provided the Cuban military under Batista with some of these tanks. And they got seized by revolutionary forces during the revolutionary battles. So I have some pictures of Fidel Castro's tank, which are quite good. This is the tank he got a hold of. It was like, no, I'm taking you down. This was the tank he used in this. So this is our M4 that we discussed at the top of the episode. And by January 1st, 1959, he gets this tank in 1958. So remember, he starts this Revolutionary War in 1956. 2 years later, he gets the tank. January 1st, 1959, almost perfectly 3 years after Castro and Che start this together, Batista flees and Castro takes over. Now, this marks the end of the Batista dictatorship in Cuba. So, when Fidel Castro comes to power, right, Che starts marching troops to Havana. And the process they follow, if you look at a map of the Cuban island, I'm going to see if I can find this for us to reference together. They march all the way up Cuba, basically liberating all of these different cities until they get to Havana. So this is the march, the direction they go, all the way up to Havana here. And remember, most of the indigenous population of Havana is living over here in the east. By the time they get to Havana, Batista's gone. And they are able to basically take Havana with like no opposition by this point. Yes, I was recently in Cuba. I was in Cuba for 6 days. So that's what we're doing here. We're telling you all the information the Cuban people wanted us to share. And the Cuban people said the most important thing we could do is combat anti-Cuban propaganda in the United States and tell the truth about what's actually going on there, but also the truth about their government, the truth about their revolution, the truth about what the United States wants with Cuba. The United States wants to return Cuba to a pre-revolutionary, basically neo-colony that only exists there to oppress the Cuban people and make United States business interests like profit and thrive. So this is what the Cuban people really told us was number one priority. You're here now. You're hearing us. You're hearing us tell you about our own history, about our values, about what we want. Now your greatest task is to go back and tell other people about this around the world. Combat the lies, combat the misinformation. So that's why we're doing this 2-week deep dive on everything. Now, Che Guevara marches the troops to Havana. Fidel marches troops to the Moncada Barracks, which is a military base, right, of people who'd worked under Batista. By the time he gets there, every single soldier in the barracks defects and joins Castro's army. So after 3 years of fighting, they're starting to win, and everybody is on board and backing this. By January 7th, a week later, the United States recognizes the Castro government as being the official new government of Cuba. Now, the United States doesn't know what to expect from this. They're like, okay, maybe he'll be our guy. Maybe he's just like some military dude dictator, right? So they assumed that Cuba would still be operating as a neo-colony of the United States. Castro, meanwhile, hated the United States. And he had actually written in 1958 The Americans are going to pay dearly for what they are doing. So the United States didn't know this, though. So they're like, all right, new guy in charge of Cuba, I guess. We don't want to piss him off. We'll probably work with him. All right, fine. Castro's in charge. But Castro's main goal was to free Cuba now from U.S. imperialism. He'd liberated Cuba from the dictatorship of Batista, but he had not yet liberated Cuba fully because Cuba was still under the repressive thumb of the United States government. So, starting less than a month later, February 4th, 1959, massive reforms start going on the island. 200,000 families are given land. By 1960, soldiers were nationalizing land left and right. And they even went in the first rounds of nationalization to Fidel Castro's family's land. Remember, Fidel Castro's family had been pretty well off. There was Castro Town. They had owned all sorts of small businesses all over Cuba. So when the soldiers show up at Fidel Castro's family's land, his mom comes out with a rifle and is like, what are you here doing? Like, there must be a mistake, right? She's like, call my son. And the soldiers are like, your son sent us, right? So that's a really, really interesting story. And this is the kind of stuff that Castro did that really made the people of Cuba trust him and love him. So he had nationalized his own family's land to make an example out of the first rounds of things. 6 months later, the United States realizes, we've got a communist on our hands, right? And they immediately begin the plot to overthrow Fidel Castro. Now, this plot, I think we all know some of the famous things about this. I have a whole podcast episode that goes into this. They try over 600 times to assassinate Fidel Castro. And they do all sorts of weird, bizarre things. Some of them are downright kooky and funny. At one point, they thought that if they could make him lose his hair, he'd be less popular because they thought that maybe the power of Fidel Castro with the people was in his beard. I mean, they try so many ridiculous things. They tried dosing him with psychedelic drugs before a TV appearance to make people think that he was, just like a crazed lunatic. It's absolutely bonkers, all the stuff they did to try to defeat Fidel Castro. At one point, they sent Fidel Castro's ex-girlfriend to try to seduce him and murder him. But when she got there after receiving CIA training, he immediately knew. And he was like, were you sent here to kill me? And she was like, well, I mean, technically, yes. But, like, really, I just wanted to see you. And he was like, okay. And then they just had sex. Like, all of this stuff, the CIA could not succeed in defeating him. And this is the same thing, though, we see with the U.S. government all the time. They never understand why people love these leaders in communist places. And it's because these leaders are working for the people. They're giving them housing. They're giving them education. They're giving them healthcare. They're giving them all these things that are capitalist-backed dictatorships of U.S. aggression. These people were not getting, right? They were being tortured. They were being murdered. They were living in slums. They had over 25% unemployment rate. They weren't able to afford food. So, of course, the people love Fidel Castro, who shows up, nationalizes land, starts giving them food and jobs and education and healthcare. So, this kind of plot that was going on with the CIA, it was called Operation Mongoose. And if you look up Operation Mongoose documents, you will find all sorts of weird, kooky, zany stuff that the CIA tried to do in this effort to get rid of Fidel Castro. So 1961, Bay of Pigs finally comes about, and this is an invasion attempt by the U.S. government. They're like, we got to get rid of this guy immediately. The rich in Cuba fled, mostly to the United States, and they formed an exile council in the United States, where they there plotted to overthrow Castro and replace it with a guy named Jose Milo Cardona. So a lot of the Cuban Americans you talk to today, the Cuban diaspora, usually they come in different waves, but the ones who have been here the longest come from this. They are anti-Castro, pro-U.S. government, kind of pro-exploitation people. They're people whose families had profited from exploiting the local black population, the local indigenous population of Cuba. And that is why they are so vocally anti-communist in the United States today. They also teamed up with the United States government, and that's why their voices are pushed so aggressively forward. I do have another video, I think, of Drake. I'm going to look to see if this is true. I put this note, but I didn't say which one. So I'm not really sure. Oh, I think that was the only one I had. Oh, I'm not sure.
And Fidel Castro.
Let's see. Oh no, that was about an international movement. I think we already played it. The other video I was gonna do. So that's pretty good. Oh, maybe no. Maybe this is it. Let's see. Let's see. Sorry, this might not be especially relevant, but it also might be. Or I'm not sure. I didn't organize today's as well as yesterday's. Oops.
Fidel Castro also met with us, and Comandante Victor Drake was there leading that meeting too.
Esa fue la reunión
That was the meeting.
muy secreta,
It was a very secret meeting.
donde había pocos compañeros.
Not many people were there, few comrades were there.
Los demás, como ustedes han visto por ahí según la foto, el Che, no se parecía el Che.
And maybe you have seen the photo of Che Guevara after his transformation to go on that mission. That they color his hair and everything.
Y entonces se habló ahí, ya era para salir,
It was to go out.
porque en el transcurso de esos días, de esos días, que el primer entrenamiento comenzó el día 2 de febrero
First training started February the 2nd,
de 1965.
1960.
Okay, it's not the right one. That's about a different thing that they went on. Ugh, I'm so bummed. I had a video about them talking about the Bay of Pigs, and I don't have it anymore. It got deleted when my phone went all cuckoo mode. Ugh, I'm so upset. So I'll just tell you basically what happened. So the CIA works together with these exile groups to plan an invasion of Cuba that we now know as Bay of Pigs. So 1,400 Cuban exiles come together to form something called Brigade 2506. All right? And on April 15th, 1961, Brigade 2506 arrives in Cuba. 5 days later, they surrender. So what exactly happened? Well, I have something that I'm going to show you guys tomorrow, but I'll play it today as well because it's a really, really powerful image. And I want you to think about this. You're in Cuba. Let's see, where is this picture? Oh my God, do I not have it? Oh, if they deleted this one as well, I'm so mad. Oh, I think this is it. This is a video. Hold on. You're in Cuba. You are trying to fix it. You had the 5 problems that were presented under Batista: literacy crisis, education, healthcare, housing. You got to fix the whole country. You're in the middle of it, 1961. It's been 2 years, right? What are you doing? You're teaching people things. This is a blackboard, a chalkboard that had been at the site of the Bay of Pigs invasion in a school. They were teaching kids how to read. Look at this little, this is still the original text that was on the chalkboard in 1961. Who shows up? That Brigade 2506 there with the backing of the American military to overthrow your government. And this is the context for this blackboard.
They just shoot at the school.
Bien, ahora les pido por favor que me acompañen al museo para avanzar el tiempo. Van a observar en el pasillo imágenes de la campaña.
On the wall about the campaign.
Did you guys see all of the holes in the blackboard? Yeah, those were all bullet marks from them shooting up the school. They shot through the blackboard. These are holes. This is all from the warfare of it. And you can see what they were teaching at the time. Socialism in Cuba, right? This is like a little hammer and sickle maybe they got going on. They were teaching kids how to read. And these American-backed insurgents, exiles, showed up and just blasted through the school. So this is what they were up against. Now, the battle does not go well. Victor Drake, who we've been seeing talking, others, they fought in this war. And they managed to actually defeat this uprising attempt pretty quickly. Something interesting, too, is that when we were speaking with these men, there was a man there whose dad had fought, I believe, at Bay of Pigs, was asking questions. And I think his dad died fighting to defend Cuba during Bay of Pigs. So the men that were being interviewed, the three revolutionaries, they remembered his dad. They were like, yeah, we fought alongside your dad. One of them was like, I pulled your dad into a Jeep. Like, I remember all of this. And the guy was like, my father had always looked up to you. So like, this was like, like, not, obviously I didn't want to lose my dad, but like, this was important. So this was a very, very powerful moment when we were listening to them speak, and I didn't get it on video, but it was pretty wild. So from this point on, the United States is obsessed with defeating Fidel Castro, and we are going to explain why in subsequent episodes that we do, right? They have Operation Mongoose. They undertake all these downright silly, bizarre things to try to kill Fidel Castro. But meanwhile, from 1963 to 1991, the Cuban island is just focused on building their revolution. And we're going to see the fruits of that work. We're going to see it in their education system when we do our education day. We're going to see it in their hospitals when we do their hospital days. They are all in on this revolution. And as the woman that we saw speaking said, the revolution gave us our lives. Like, we got our lives from it. And you really see the beautiful, amazing things that they were able to build. Now, unfortunately, what happens in 1991? The USSR is dismantled. And this causes massive ripple effects throughout the socialist world. As we saw them say in yesterday's episode, we were never a satellite of the USSR, but they helped us with many things. And of course, we're going to acknowledge that. When the USSR was dismantled, Cuba lost one of its main trading partners. And this actually had a catastrophic effect on Cuba. Now, when I was in Cuba recently, I was like, this reminds me of that era. This area is called the special period in time of peace, right? There was a special period in time of war, then there was a special period in time of peace. And when I was there, I was like, does this remind you guys here on the island of the special period? And they were like, this is not nearly as bad as the special period. So when we tell you the Cuban people are dealing with hardships because of the blockade and the tightening and the restriction of the blockade, it's true. But when we tell you the Cuban people have always been dealing with hardships, that is true too, right? That is, hydrate. That is true too. That is what is really going on with these people. They have dealt with people shooting up their schools, Americans shooting up their schools. They have dealt with the United States trying to murder their leader 600 times. They dealt with massive fuel shortages after 1991. I know, I'm going to do some tea after this. We're almost done now. Let me get through it. I'll do the tea. I'll drink the hot tea. So this special period basically meant that they lost access to a lot of resources on the island that they had been dealing with. And during this period, people started riding bicycles as a show of revolutionary commitment, dedication, because they weren't able to fuel their cars. When I was in Cuba recently, I saw a lot of people on bicycles again. This is something they've been through before. I know, I'll do it, everybody. I'll do it. And Fidel Castro remained the leader of Cuba until 2007. He got older, he had some health issues, and he was forced to retire. And his brother, Raul Castro, became the next leader of Cuba. Raul Castro led from 2007 to 2020. And one of the things that you'll notice when we look at pictures around Cuba, if we looked at the video of the farm, you'll see things like this. One second. This is a photo. This is Fidel Castro. This is Raul Castro. And this is their current president, Miguel Diaz-Canel. So these are all of their leaders, and people liked Raul Castro as well. And when Fidel Castro retired, he'd always been seen in these like military suits. He switched over to like the Havana shirt we think of today, like the white lightweight shirt. And he got really involved in farming and educating and learning about farming and learning how to improve food quality there. So he had this huge tie to the farming community as well in his last years before he passed away. He ultimately did pass away. He's very old. He lived a very, very good long life, which a lot of revolutionaries don't get. And the people of Cuba never lost their love for Fidel Castro. When you're in Cuba, if you ask anybody, why do you have this really cool thing? Why do you guys do this really cool thing? They'll all tell you it's Fidel Castro. You walk through any public place, they might not have been allowed to name things after Fidel Castro per his will. When Fidel Castro died, he said, don't name streets after me, don't name plazas after me, because I am not the reason for the revolution. Like, it's not me, and I don't want you to associate it with me. But there's pictures of him everywhere. And everyone on that island loves that man. So when you're in Cuba and you hear the people there talk about Fidel Castro, even people who aren't diehard communists, even people who are like, I don't know, maybe capitalism will be better at this point. The blockade's so hard to deal with, whatever. They all love Fidel Castro. They do not hate him. And then you come to the United States and you hear these people be like, he's a dictator who oppressed his people. You think back about what Batista, the actual dictator, really did, right? How he murdered and slaughtered people en masse, how he brutally repressed them, how he kept them living in poverty and squalor when he let them live it all. And then you hear Americans be like, no, that was fine. Castro's the real dictator. A man who did not oppress his people, a man who did not even believe himself to be in charge of his people, right? Believed himself to be one of his people. A man who nationalized his family's farms first to set a good example. A man who said, do not name things after me because I am just one of you. And you hear this cognitive dissonance and you realize why the Cuban people are like, the most important thing you can do as a Westerner, as an American, whatever, anywhere in the world, is tell the truth about us, about our revolution, about what we think, about what we actually believe. You see why the people in Cuba are like, we don't understand why those people in the United States keep saying they're Cuban. They're not Cuban. You see why the director of the hospital said, everyone is where they want to be. You wanted to be in the United States, so you left. I wanted to be in Cuba, so I stayed. I'm Cuban. And you really get it. You really, really get it. So these people love Fidel Castro and they honor him with everything they do every single day. Even when he said, no, don't do that. They're like, come on, man. So in 2021, Miguel Diaz-Canel is the person who became president. And that is who we got to see speak. And that is who, on Friday, I will actually show you videos of what he said to us and him speaking to us. Now, Miguel Diaz-Canel, we're going to talk a little bit about him. His parents were a teacher and a lath operator. And if you don't know what a lath is, let me show you. It is one of these industrial machines that's used in all sorts of production. It's used sometimes in cloth-related production as well. And this is what his dad is. So a very working class family, working class people. And Miguel Diaz-Canel became an electronics engineer and then taught engineering, was a teacher of engineering. He also had been the first secretary of something called the Young Communist League in Villa Clara, where he lived. And the Young Communist League, if you don't know what that is, we're going to learn a lot about that on Friday too. The Young Communist League is who set up our mission there. And in Cuba, anybody under the age of 35 is considered young enough to join the Young Communist League. You're considered youth in Cuba until up to the age of 35, which is very, very fascinating. So he then went on to become the secretary of the provincial party committee. Now in Cuba, the way things work, they have a municipality, which is kind of like a city or a smaller level. Then they have a province, the provincial level, which is one step up. We might think of that as like a state or something like that. Except Cuba is a quarter the size of California, so maybe more the size of a county. And then one stage up from that, they have kind of the national level. So he was the first secretary of the provincial party committee, so up from the municipality. And the party, remember, is not the same as the government. So in Cuba, you can be in the government and not be in the party. They have many people who are in the government who aren't in the party, and we'll talk about that on Friday as well. You can be in the party and not be in the government. These are two totally different things. Now, the thing that everybody knew him for in his party work, Miguel Diaz-Canel, is that in the 90s, he was a vocal proponent of LGBTQ rights in Cuba when people weren't. People didn't really think about it. If they did, they were like, I don't know about that. He was always the guy who defended LGBTQ rights. And that's why under his guidance, or after his guidance even, 2019 is when under Raul Castro, they changed and altered their constitution in Cuba to constitutionally protect LGBTQ rights. And when they first started this, when they first started working on their constitution, which is a fascinating process in itself, the constitution is decided upon by everybody in Cuba. You got to vote on your constitution. You could log onto a computer, put in your name, your address, and vote on what changes you wanted to your constitution. But they didn't just have everybody vote out of nowhere. They led a massive education campaign first, outreach campaign, to teach people about these issues they were really voting on. And when a proposal was made, like we should enshrine LGBTQ rights in our constitution, A lot of people in the island weren't very educated about LGBTQ rights. When they polled people, initially, most people were like, I don't think I'd vote in favor of that. So they launched a massive educational outreach campaign to teach people about queer rights. And ultimately, after this campaign was finished, when everybody voted, they voted in favor of enshrining LGBTQ rights in their constitution. And it passed. And this is in part due to the massive work that Miguel Diaz-Canel did in the field of gay rights since the 90s there. Really, really amazing. So, it's wild also to hear Americans tell you they have a dictatorship when they enjoy more direct democracy than most average Americans can even fathom. Most of us can't even imagine getting to go onto a computer and vote on what ends up in your constitution, right? Absolutely wild. So he then became the Minister of Higher Education. This is Diaz-Canel before becoming president. Then he became the Vice President of Council of Ministers. And then he became the first vice president of the Council of the State, where he served as the senior deputy to President Raul Castro, and then eventually became the president. So that is how we ended up with Miguel Diaz-Canel as president today. Now, on Friday, I'm going to get to show you him speaking to us. They met with us. All of the people who came on the Nuestra America convoy. We got to go into where their parliament meets. We got to sit there and we got to hear this man speak to us for 30 minutes. And his words were very, very, very powerful. And I'm very, very excited to share them all with you on Friday. What we're going to do tomorrow, though, to really build on this understanding of Cuba, because I don't think you can understand Cuba without its history. I don't think you can understand the Cuban people without understanding the July 26th movement. I don't think you can understand why they so violently defend their revolution. They prepared to die for their revolution. Unless you understand what life was like on the island before they got their revolution. Unless you understand the brutality and the misery that the Batista regime inflicted on them, or the consistent brutality that the United States government has inflicted upon these people. You have to understand the United States' current policy against the blockade against Cuba as an extension of those same imperialist policies that we've had against them since their formation so many years ago. Cuba is a revolutionary beacon in the world. And the thing about Cuba, again, is that it is international. If you need anything, Cuba will send it. People wrote to Cuba from rural areas of the African continent saying, I want to learn how to read. Cuba translated their educational materials into whatever language that person spoke. They translated things into indigenous languages people thought were long dead. They translated things into Braille. And they sent a teacher to where you lived, no matter how far away, no matter how hard to get to teach you how to read. They did the same thing with doctors. These are people who care so much about the world. I'm going to cry just thinking about it. And the way we repay them is with cruelty, is with deriding their accomplishments, is with calling their chosen leaders, selected leaders, their democratic process fake. Those are dictators. By saying they're victims of a thing that they actively not only chose, but that they fight for every single day. When you talk to a Cuban American, you'll feel out of your mind after you've been on the island. When you've talked to actual Cubans, and then you talk to a Cuban American who tells you, no, that's not what they think. Listen to me. I know what they think. You'll feel crazy. You'll feel absolutely crazy. And it's because of how hard the propaganda against the Cuban people works. We have a video from Marxist Gamer Zero. Is this going to be a Rickroll? I can't do a Rickroll right now. Is it real? Of Fidel saying that they are internationalists. And this is what you will see from the Cuban people. They are internationalists. And not in the Trotsky way. You don't do that. That's just car. Okay, let's watch it.
Si nosotros tenemos un día que renunciar a nuestra bandera que tanto amamos, renunciamos y ello hay que hacerlo en aras de la integración y la unidad política de América Latina. Para nosotros eso es un valor trascendente. Como si un día quieren organizar un Estado mundial justo, no un mundo bajo la batuta y el dominio de una superpotencia que quiere establecer el orden. Si un mundo, la humanidad avanzara tanto que en pensar en una integración económica y política universal, nosotros también renunciaríamos a nuestra bandera porque somos internacionalistas. No somos chauvinistas, no somos nacionalistas estrechos. Somos patriotas, amamos nuestra patria. Respetamos y exaltamos los valores nacionales, pero nuestra filosofía fundamentalmente es la del internacionalismo.
And you see this. You see this in everything they do, right? So this idea also that these people want to tell you that the Cuban people weren't happy to see us. You think these people who've dedicated their lives to building international solidarity and socialism weren't happy to see a convoy of 600 socialists from all over the world show up and say, hey, you're not alone? I'm going to cry thinking about the welcome we got. It was one of those moments where you're like, I'm not even worthy of this much praise. I just showed up with a suitcase and gave some money, you know? But it doesn't matter. These people welcomed us with open arms and were grateful for us to be there, you know? So when you see people on the internet get online and tell you all sorts of things about Cuba, think about whose interests those statements really serve. Think about who benefits from that. Who benefits from telling you that you're actually a bad person if you go try to stand with people in their toughest moments? Who benefits from telling you that everybody under socialism, those are big, bad, scary dictators, and actually things were better off when the United States was in control? Who benefits from telling you that those people are suffering under socialism every single day? When you look at their living conditions, and their living conditions are the same as many places in the United States, if not better because of the programs they have built, while also suffering one of the harshest blockades in human history, right? I know, I cry all the time. I always cry about Cuba and crabs. Cuba and crabs make me cry. Everybody knows. So just remember that. And remember, there's a propaganda war out there. And the Cuban people know it. And they told us the most important thing we could do is fight the propaganda war on their behalf. Tell the truth. Go out and tell the truth about Cuba and what they want and who they actually are and what they value and what they're going through. So that's your task as well. As we get through these 2 weeks of content, I'm going to rest my voice for the next 20 hours so I can hopefully have it to walk you through the rest of everything on Theory Thursday tomorrow. You know, that's what we're up to. And tomorrow we are going to hear from Castro himself. We are going to read Castro's On Marxism and Leninism, and we are going to hear about the guiding ideology of their country. Remember, billions of people in the world are Marxist-Leninists. China, Cuba, North Korea, the DPRK. I mean, there are billions of Marxist-Leninists in the world. And as the capitalists seek to murder everybody on the planet, Laos, yes, as the capitalists seek to bomb people in Iran, as they kill children in Iran, as they leave children to be homeless on the streets here and starving, as they make you ration your medication if you have access to it at all, it is the communists who are trying to keep you alive. It is the communists who will send you their best doctors, their best teachers to help you. So, remember that. If you are a communist, you're on the right side of history. I am tearing up thinking about Cuba. As always, Cuba always makes me cry. So let's learn about what communism is tomorrow in the words of Fidel Castro and why that ideology is a liberation ideology for the most vulnerable people around the world and is not what the big, bad, evil capitalists here in the United States try to convince you it is. Because in reality, communism is good for us and it's bad for them. And that's why they work so hard to make sure you hate it. Okay, so who should we raid before we go? Today is Larry on. Should we send everybody Larry? Larry's reading Che today. Let's do it. We're doing it. Sending you all to Leaping Larry. Let's get this party going. A little precursor for what we got going on tomorrow. Thank you all for hanging out. Thanks for the new subscribers. Thanks for the new viewers. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we are kind of nerds here. It's a good opportunity to learn, though, I think. Okay, getting ready for the Larry raid. Everybody get ready. And go. Bye.